American Comics. My Warhammer Simulator Chapter 876-900. Chapter 876. Luo Sha's War God Divine Title. With Thanos, who is holding the Cosmic Cube, completely departing from the already dilapidated Asgard continent, this sudden encounter with a powerful enemy finally concluded. Subsequently, a large number of automatic servo robots were dispatched to the ground by Iron Man David, beginning to rescue the wounded and search for the bodies of the fallen as quickly as possible. As it stood, even without counting the Asgardians, who were on the brink of extinction, the Human Federation's losses alone far exceeded those of a chaos invasion or an expeditionary battle. Approximately 1,000 librarian brothers from various Astartes companies were left with fewer than 200 survivors. The Astartes company with the most severe casualties was the Blood Raven Company, largely due to their combat traditions, which meant their librarian units made up the largest proportion of their forces. As for the mortals, the least losses were suffered by Doctor Strange and the heavily armored mage units from Kamar Taj. Only 1/3 of their numbers experienced various backlash effects from failed spells. However, the numerous national religion heroes painstakingly recruited by Pietro in secret over many years suffered quite heavy losses. Countless individuals who sacrificed themselves in Asgard were devout believers completely loyal to the Emperor and the Primarchs. But on the other hand, Luo Sha, who was not bothered by this, also believed that it greatly reduced the probability of the local national religion causing more trouble. In the previous incident where Tony was corrupted, the national religion forces played an unsavory role. It was just that Luo Sha, constrained by more important matters and the internal unity of the Human Federation, had let it pass. Scarlet Witch Wanda was severely wounded with a broken arm in the battle. Fortunately, she could regrow it in the future with the panacea, and Redidus could also offer her the option of a mechanical prosthetic limb. However, according to intelligence gathered by assassin intelligence agents infiltrated within the local national religion, Wanda's mental state had been somewhat stimulated, requiring comprehensive observation and more vigilance. As for the mutants, although they brought the Phoenix Force host, Jean Grey, because they anticipated the intensity of the battle, the number of alpha-level mutant casualties was still very heavy. Many young mutants who could have joined Luo Sha's legion and become a backbone force regrettably perished here. Though Magneto Marx appeared to have sustained little damage on the surface, his heart was riddled with holes. Especially after his mutant race paid such an astonishing price in casualties, he began to question whether his decision to join the human empire was a sound one. However, regarding the mutant race's long-term concealment of the Phoenix Force host, Luo Sha and Iron Man David, after discussion, did not hold the mutant race accountable in any form. After all, they had already proven their loyalty on the battlefield with countless sacrifices. Moreover, Luo Sha's Primarch brother, Fulgrim, had unexpectedly become the new host of the Phoenix Force, making any further accountability unnecessary. Soon after, Thor, who had conversed with Odin for some time, went to comfort Queen Frigga and Jane Foster, among other relatives. Luo Sha, who had regained his human form, also came before Odin. At this moment, Odin, whose increasingly aged face showed no emotion, stood amidst the ruins of Odin's vault, his remaining hand occasionally caressing the Gingnur, the unerring divine spear. Haha, Primarch boy, do you know I was just bluffing Thanos earlier? In fact, I might not be able to handle the Mad Titan when he fully unleashes the Cosmic Cube. Odin, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly turned to Luo Sha and said. Luo Sha, with a calm expression, nodded slightly and said, I vaguely guessed as much, because according to your style of handling affairs, you wouldn't leave such a terrifying enemy for the future Thor to deal with, although I believe that the future me and Thor will certainly be able to defeat Thanos, who controls the Cosmic Cube. Hehe, Primarch boy, having confidence is a good thing, and I also believe that you can do things that we old folks cannot, but never forget, it's not just that you have 5 big guys standing behind you, Thanos also has 5 equally matched opponents standing behind him. At this moment, Odin, his expression becoming solemn, continued to speak towards Luo Sha. In a sense, this is no longer a low-level war that people like us can casually meddle in. Even if those terrifying existences who use cosmic rules or grand powers far beyond our imagination cannot directly intervene, the cosmic powerhouses chosen by them will be one of your greatest enemies in the future. Now, there is very little we old folks can do for you. All of you must strive to unite to secure a glimmer of hope for humanity or the Asgardians in the future. Before this, I have already discussed with Thor, the Asgardians will become one of the Human Federation's subordinate races, and the most important Bifrost bridge on this Asgard continent will be handed over to your legion for safekeeping, whether you use it as a teleportation platform for sweeping the depths of the universe or as a planet-destroying weapon, as you wish. Luo Sha boy, I know what you want to say, but this is a decision I discussed with the Emperor himself before I returned. It's just that I didn't expect Asgard to unexpectedly encounter this major upheaval. Odin's words made Luo Sha, whose mouth was slightly agape, swallow back more words. Although Luo Sha, this descendant of the Emperor, sometimes seemed less than filial, since the Emperor had already made the corresponding arrangements, he could only accept them entirely. At this moment, Odin, with a slight frown, seemed to fall into thought. But the next second, he immediately spoke to Luo Sha before him. That concludes the general arrangements for public matters. I cannot stay in the real universe for much longer. The situation faced by Ancient One and the Emperor there is more difficult, and I must rush back to help them. However, before that, I must also give you some extra help on a personal level. Luo Sha boy, do you know why the Asgardians are called gods in the Nine Realms? It's not just because we are long-lived, nor is it because I once led the Heavenly Palace army to conquer the Nine Realms, but because our ancient Asgardian divine race possesses an extremely special and powerful divine power, which is the divine titles of the Asgardian gods. My divine title is Heavenly Father, inherited from the first Asgardian god king, my great-grandfather Buri. Thor's divine title is Thor, which is why he can continuously unleash his thunder god power in battle. Even Loki, whom you killed, possessed the divine title of Fire God. And now, I intend to bestow upon you the powerful divine title left behind by my former brother Tyr, to give you some important leverage in dealing with the future situation. As for the name of this divine title, you must have heard it before, and that is War God. Thank you all for your support. There isn't much important plot left for the local setting. If I don't write about Warhammer soon, my subscriptions will drop. In fact, the gods of Asgard are far from being true creator gods. Even if Rogel Dorn was granted the ancient war god title by Odin, the Allfather, he would inevitably be unable to obtain the Thor-like power that could gradually grow stronger. However, after a period of contemplation, Rogel Dorn decided to accept the war god title and the accompanying divine power. One reason was that the war situation on the human empire's side was deteriorating, and things were becoming unstable in this native universe. Especially the arrival of Thanos. Once again, it brought Rogel Dorn a sense of impending crisis, making him need to become stronger as soon as possible. On the other hand, Rogel Dorn had also decided that before returning to Makrag, he would send all the local fleets into the depths of the universe, cooperating with a portion of the Raven Guard and mortal agents to search for the remaining 2 Infinity Stones. Since Thanos, who already possessed the Tesseract, didn't care about the Infinity Stones, then he, Rogel Dorn, might as well collect all the Infinity Stones. Rogel Dorn believed that the terrifying state of having all 6 stones would, even if it couldn't overpower the current Thanos, would certainly be able to contend with him, thereby safeguarding a place for the human race. Soon after, Odin, the Allfather, who had asked Rogel Dorn to wait a moment, returned from the depths of the incredibly dilapidated Odin's vault. He carefully placed a red rhomboid crystal, hovering above his palm, slowly into Rogel Dorn's massive body. However, Rogel Dorn, who had successfully obtained the War God title, neither felt the repeated emergence of unfamiliar power nor noticed any discomfort in his body. As for Rogel Dorn's doubts, Odin, the Allfather, shook his head slightly, equally bewildered by this. Ultimately, Odin, the Allfather, guessed that perhaps Rogel Dorn, as a Primarch, needed some time to integrate the war god title. Because there had never been a Midgardian mortal who had obtained the power of a title belonging to the gods of Asgard. Rogel Dorn could only passively accept this, hoping that the war god title could bring him even greater surprises. In the following period, the group, having successfully returned to native Terra, became busy once again. Thor, leading Heimdall, chose a more suitable area on native Terra as a settlement. Because in the long future, these Asgardians would become a part of the human race, working hard and fighting for the future of all. And AI Stark and Redditus, after learning that the Bifrost Bridge was about to arrive near the void of native Terra. The two non-human beings immediately began the arduous task of completely transforming the incredibly dilapidated Asgard continent into a star-destroying weapon platform. Now, counting the Hero Tower, which was nearing the completion of its repair work, and the Battle Moon, whose construction progress had just reached about halfway. Rogel Dorn alone had as many as 3 methods that could be used to destroy stars. If one were to include humanoid unconventional forces such as the Phoenix Force and the Thor Force, then it would be impossible to calculate with data. Soon after, Odin, the Allfather, who had stayed briefly, bid a simple farewell to everyone and left the real universe once again. And Thor, who had experienced a dramatic change in his homeland, and whose entire temperament had obviously become more mature, also made some parting instructions to Rogel Dorn and the others. He was about to go to Nidavellir, where the dwarves lived, wanting to reforge a powerful weapon that could threaten Thanos. By the way, Thor also wanted to venture deep into the universe to undergo some training and completely master the power of the thunder god within him. To this, Rogel Dorn could only give a big hug, as well as a large number of panaceas for survival. And after Thor used the Bifrost Bridge, docked in the cold void, to teleport away. Rogel Dorn also felt that he needed to return to Macragge and continue to lead the Astartes Legion in launching endless wars of recovery. However, before that, the thoughtful Rogel Dorn also reassembled a portion of the Human Federation's high-level officials on the Gemini Islands. He removed the 3 Infinity Stones that had been embedded in the Infinity Gauntlet. Among them, the Space Stone continued to be used by Redditus and others. After all, the current warp drive could not do without the energy and fusion of the Space Stone. The Mind Stone was handed over to Iron Man David for safekeeping. As for the Reality Stone, which he had just obtained not long ago, Rogel Dorn decided to bring it back to the Warhammer universe to see if it could play some more unique uses, just like the Mind Stone before. And after Rogel Dorn quickly dealt with many matters on native Terra, and also arranged the future task plans for the people of the Human Federation. The whole person, with a heavy heart, Fulgrim suddenly found Rogel Dorn, who was about to leave the native world. "Little brother, it seems that I will not be able to leave the native world with you in the short term and return to the fleet." Fulgrim, whose handsome face was as cold as frost, said to Rogel Dorn in front of him. "Let me boldly guess, it's not the influence of the Phoenix Force, is it?" Rogel Dorn, taking a deep breath, was not too surprised by this. If these extremely ancient and powerful forces did not have any price, then wouldn't the host be able to do whatever they wanted? According to the vague explanation of the Phoenix Force, which has awakened a part of its power, it chose to stay on native Terra in order to avoid a terrifying enemy from the depths of the universe, and the so-called great enemy is not the Tesseract controlled by Thanos. It is unwilling to reveal more about the specific situation, which also leads to the fact that as long as the Phoenix Force remains in my body, I will not be able to leave native Terra. I think it is possible to try to forcibly pass through the warp gate, but it is estimated that it will completely anger the Phoenix Force in the body, so the huge losses caused are completely not worth it. As soon as Fulgrim's voice fell, Rogel Dorn, nodding slightly, said, "That's good too, brother, then you can stay on native Terra for the time being to preside over the overall situation, on the one hand to prevent Thanos and other alien forces from coming to stir up trouble, and on the other hand, you can also help the Raven Guard to find the true whereabouts of the remaining 2 Infinity Stones for me." That's all I can do for now, so the battle on the Empire's side is up to you, little brother. Fulgrim, whose many emotions gradually stabilized, said to Rogel Dorn with a solemn expression. And Rogel Dorn, hearing the other party's instructions, nodded slightly. It's just that he couldn't help but let out a long sigh. Before long, Rogel Dorn, having completed all preparations, led 5 Super Astartes giant raven guards, who had completed all the transformation surgeries, to the circular square below the base. And as several Librarius brothers quickly released a large amount of psychic power. A warp rift, which suddenly appeared in the air, was clearly presented in front of everyone. At this moment, Rogel Dorn, wearing vibranium power armor, led the even larger giant raven guards into the depths of the warp rift without any hesitation, heading to Macragge, which he had not seen for a long time. Thank you all for your support. The sudden return of Primarch Rabute Guilliman brought a long-lost sense of pressure back to the upper echelons of Macragge. The vast human departments, constantly preparing for the Plague Wars, accelerated their operations once more. Almost every second, astronomical quantities of war materials were transported to Macragge. At the same time, Rabute Guilliman, as regent of the Imperium Nihilus, also received a great deal of important intelligence from Chapter Master Calgar and others who came to see him, regarding the decades after his departure. Currently, the vast majority of Imperial worlds within Ultramar's various sectors have been successfully reclaimed. Only a few planets, located too remotely or perpetually surrounded by warp storms, are awaiting a better time for reclamation. In other words, only the Scourge stars, corrupted and occupied by Nurgle, remain as a ghastly scar before everyone. In addition, because dozens of Ultramarines' successor chapters who had an audience with Regent of the Imperium Nihilus Rabute Guilliman had basically received the secret missions he had once issued. These Space Marine chapters' internal expansion plans are also steadily advancing, with a new generation of Primaris Space Marines gradually replacing the veterans within many companies, becoming the backbone of each chapter. For example, in order to increase the success rate of Primaris surgeries and thoroughly test the combat enhancements of Primaris Space Marines. Even many great company captains within the 22nd Legion, with several panaceas as insurance, risked their lives to undergo Primaris transformation. Except for Blood Raven's company captain Gabriel, who was too unlucky. His first Primaris transformation temporarily failed, and he can only wait for the next opportunity. Other captains such as Karkaradon's company captain Tyberos, Raven Guard Shadow Captain Surali, and Silver Skull's librarian Chivalros successfully became Primaris Space Marines. Among them, Tyberos, whose physique was already burly and huge, increased in height once again. If he were to wear Rabute Guilliman's true silver power armor, then the current Tyberos, in terms of physique alone, would be indistinguishable from a Primarch. However, Rabute Guilliman, with a slight frown, felt a bit displeased with the recklessness of this group of commanding officers. After all, these Space Marine veterans were the pillars of the 22nd Legion. If they accidentally encountered completely unnecessary mishaps during the Primaris transformation process, then even if Rabute Guilliman went to weep at the Emperor's shrine, he wouldn't be able to bring them back, he could only go to the Homunculus covens. Subsequently, even more bad news came one after another from Calgar and others. The first thing that completely froze the expression on Rabute Guilliman's face was about Uriel Ventress. Not long ago, Uriel Ventress, along with Trazyn the Infinite, boarded a Sword-class frigate equipped with a warp drive, intending to conduct the first field test. However, not long after this plan began, the Sword-class frigate unfortunately became lost in the depths of the warp, disappearing without a trace. In response, Calgar and others also sent people to search for a large number of psychers to perform various divination rituals, but in the end, they still failed to find their specific whereabouts. Rabute Guilliman, however, was not worried about the safety of Uriel Ventress and Trazyn. Because these two fellows together were definitely not easy to deal with. He suspected that this was either another conspiracy by the Chaos Gods, or a trick by the Chaos Demigod, Vashtor the Archiphane, in order to distract him, the Primarch. However, Rebute Gilliman, taking a slow, deep breath, suppressed his many emotions and thoughts. He continued to listen to Calgar and the others with unparalleled calm and rationality. The following matters were basically about the major events within the Imperium of Man. The situation in the Imperium Nihilus was sometimes good and sometimes bad. Many human planets and small space marine chapters completely lost contact after transmitting only a brief psychic message. And the Indomitus Crusade Phase 2, personally led by Lord Commander Gilliman, had gradually suffered heavy losses. Several of their fleets head-on collided with even larger Tyranid invasion fleets, and the number of space marine chapters and human forces lost alone was astronomical. Even the Nachmund Gauntlet, which currently connects the Imperium's safe territories with the Imperium Nihilus, is under fierce attack by Chaos and various alien forces. Just before Rebute Gilliman returned to Macragge, Chapter Master Calgar originally planned to lead a portion of the fleet to Vigilus for emergency support first. Therefore, after Calgar and others had completely finished reporting the intelligence information, the many crisis situations that were summarized made Rebute Gilliman temporarily fall into a dilemma. He originally wanted to launch the Plague Wars in one go, completely clearing away Nurgle's corrupting tentacles in the Materium. But the successive large-scale wars forced him to consider the special circumstances in other territories of the Imperium. In the end, the more rational Rebute Gilliman decided to let Calgar take away the vast majority of the Ultramar fleet. In addition to 2/3 of the Ultramarines and the Primaris Space Marines from various successor chapters, to support Vigilus and firmly guard the Nachmund Gauntlet. And the remaining Legion fleets and many Space Marines still need to follow Rebute Gilliman to carry out this Plague Wars. However, if Rebute Gilliman previously wanted to completely reclaim the countless fallen planets within the Scourge stars, and even purify the Chaos corruption, then Rebute Gilliman's strategic plan in his heart now has completely become a crazy action to open the way with Exterminatus, and even mobilize planet-destroying weapon platforms to bombard the Scourge stars. Before long, Calgar's fleet, carrying a large amount of war materials, quickly left Macragge's void lanes and entered the warp. Rebute Gilliman, once again transforming his entire body into the warp-unleashed state, directly soared into the sky and flew alone into the depths of the cold void. He casually took out 10 golden throne gelt from the storage interface. Then he threw them out in one go, forming a warp gate of unparalleled scale. In the next second, a huge weapon fortress, the Hero Tower, with a volume scale reaching about 1/2 of the phalanx, slowly revealed its extremely conspicuous and terrifying figure. Immediately afterward, the mechanical voices from AISTC and Reductus quickly entered Rebute Gilliman's ears. "Aha, Venerable Primarch, did you miss me? Your series of orders that we have proposed are guaranteed to be completed, because the several planet-destroying cannons on the Hero Tower that have never been activated are already ravenous." This was undoubtedly Reductus's noisy movement. And AISTC, who came to the Imperium of Man for the first time, was obviously much more reserved. "I say, Rebute Gilliman, is this the legendary Macragge? If you remove those defense platforms and docking ships surrounding the near-Earth orbit, it seems to be no different from Holy Terra." Reductus also said that similar habitable worlds, your Imperium of Man has hundreds of thousands of them. "I'm afraid there are only more, not less. Tony, welcome to my world. A cold universe with only war and slaughter. Thank you for your support." Deep in the cold void, one massive metal ship after another, powered by warp engines, formed combat formations. Subsequently, a large number of Sword-class frigates also formed a denser defensive formation around the massive weapon fortress named Hero Tower. The next second, as Dark Side Regent Luo Sha issued the command to the entire fleet, a warp entrance slowly tore open in front of the fleet, allowing this massive expedition fleet to the Calamity Star Cluster to fully embark on a journey of destruction. Rumble. Soon after, a large number of spaceships that had successfully completed their warp jump continuously broke through the encirclement of small Chaos ships, gradually penetrating deeper into the Calamity Star Cluster. Once the opportunity to launch an attack was deemed appropriate, Luo Sha, as the Primarch of the Legion, did not hesitate to issue an exterminatus order against the first Chaos planet encountered by the massive fleet. In an instant, terrifyingly powerful, brilliant light spears were fired from the weapon arrays of numerous ships. In just a moment, the offensive firepower, far exceeding that of a normal fleet, completely sank the orbital platforms and several Chaos ships attempting to counterattack deep in the cold void. This was followed by an overwhelming bombardment of the Chaos planet with countless light spears. Only when no more life signs could be detected on the surface. The incredibly massive Hero Tower immediately began a very slow transformation. It aimed a planet-destroying cannon, comparable in size to a Cobra-class destroyer, towards the Chaos planet. Boom boom boom. The next moment, a brilliant light, like a stellar explosion, erupted with terrifying energy from within the planet-destroying cannon. And that Chaos planet, almost within reach, only held on for a few seconds. Countless massive cracks, clearly visible from the cold void, rapidly split across the entire planet's surface, then continuously spewed out large amounts of scorching lava from the planet's core. And after the entire destruction fleet gradually left the nearby void area. The remains of a massive planet, already shattered into pieces, lay silently deep within one crustal fragment after another. In fact, if there were Inquisitors from the Inquisition or high-ranking officials from the Terra Council within the destruction fleet, they would undoubtedly try everything to stop the Dark Side Regent's insane act of exterminatus. Because every habitable planet in the human empire is an extremely precious existence. Even a world corrupted by chaos would only have an exterminatus order issued after repeatedly confirming that it had no value for salvation. But now Regent Guilliman is in the midst of the Indemitus Crusade. The Terra Council and even the Inquisition are unaware of this due to the Imperium Nihilus's almost complete communication blackout. So Luo Sha, as the Dark Side Regent, is the sole ruler here. Even if he caused chaos in Ultramar, no one could control him. However, Luo Sha's use of exterminatus as an offensive method was also a last resort. If the expedition fleet, which had already allocated most of its combat power to Kargil, wanted to achieve more victories, then they would have to pay a very heavy price in terms of personnel casualties. This was something Luo Sha, as the Primarch of the Legion, was unwilling to see at all costs. He simply chose to let dozens of Chaos planets in the Calamity Star Cluster become the substitute losses for this Calamity expedition. Of course, Luo Sha also did not forget the ultimate goal of his Calamity expedition. That was to temporarily seal the Great Unclean One of Nurgle, Rainfather Rodriguez. If the sealing ritual unfortunately failed, then he would temporarily banish him back into the depths of the warp. As for this Great Unclean One of Nurgle, the second favorite of Loki Nurgle, Luo Sha did not expect to completely eradicate him. As long as Rainfather Rodriguez didn't cause trouble in the short term, then it would be a blessing from the Emperor. Because Luo Sha led this destruction expedition fleet in an unreasoning exterminatus strategy, the first star system in the Calamity Star Cluster was quickly cleared by them. Approximately 18 Chaos planets, long occupied by Nurgle demons, were reduced to countless cosmic dust. And Luo Sha's fleet only lost a few frigates in several skirmishes, while tens of thousands of Astartes were completely unharmed. However, when the destruction expedition fleet entered the second star system of the Calamity Star Cluster, the Death Guard Legion, having fully reacted, moved more Chaos ships back from outside. The suddenly increased combat pressure also led the Astartes from various warbands to quickly engage in boarding actions. They did this to cover the exterminatus orders from within the fleet and the weapon fortress Hero Tower against the Chaos planets. Even though Luo Sha, who could repeatedly summon T-Online Divine Beast every now and then, could achieve overwhelming advantages in the void battles. However, the steadily increasing number of Chaos ships of the Death Guard Legion still caused considerable losses to the destruction expedition fleet. Especially when, in the second star system, the expedition fleet planned to destroy the last Chaos planet. The appearance of 7 Great Unclean One of Nurgle also forced Luo Sha to join the boarding action. And in this fierce battle, the 5 Super Astartes who made their debut. The terrifying combat power of the giant Raven Guard also left a very deep impression on Luo Sha. Boom boom boom. At this moment, a giant Raven Guard, about 3.5 meters tall, suddenly detached a whirlwind missile launcher mounted on his power armor backpack. His massive fists slammed together in front of his chest. A clear, visible tremor suddenly occurred between his massive body, covered in specialized power armor. Immediately after, chunks of extremely thick vibranium armor plating rapidly underwent drastic changes in their overall form. And the giant Raven Guard, having already entered his giant transformation, was infinitely close to 4 meters in height. At a glance, he was almost as tall as Primarch Luo Sha, who was clashing back and forth with 2 great unclean one of Nurgle. This giant Raven Guard quickly rotated his metal helmet. He had fully adapted to the surging strength and speed. Then, he and another giant Raven Guard next to him immediately launched an astonishing charge against a great unclean one of Nurgle attempting to ambush the Primarch. Boom! In an instant, these 2 giant Raven Guard, who had completed their transformation, were able to firmly pin a much larger great unclean one of Nurgle in place. Moreover, as time rapidly passed, the giant Raven Guard, who could immune most physical attacks with their vibranium armor and giant physique, gradually gained the upper hand. Bang bang bang. At this moment, Luo Sha, using his blood scythe, forcefully cut down 2 great unclean one of Nurgle, and his massive body heavily landed on the metal floor. His cold gaze swept back and forth over the giant Raven Guard who were fighting 2 against 1, and he couldn't help but let out a fleeting, low chuckle. Thank you all for your support. Boom, boom, boom. Luo Sha, incredibly excited by the success of the giant Raven Guard, immediately activated his vibranium power armor. He subconsciously tightened his grip on the blood scythe in his palm and swiftly charged towards the other great unclean one of Nurgle who were fiercely battling numerous Astartes inside the Chaos ships. Not long after, the 7 great unclean one of Nurgle successively fell under the repeated assaults of Luo Sha and the many Astartes, signifying that the boarding action had once again resulted in the Imperium's ultimate victory. Rumble. The next moment, as the Weapon Fortress Hero Tower underwent another mechanical transformation, a massive planet destroyer cannon was rotated out from within. Tens of seconds later, the Chaos planet in front of the destroyer fleet was completely engulfed and annihilated by the scorching lava and firestorms that swept across its entire continental plates, and was on the verge of becoming fragmented debris. Currently, 2 of the 3 star systems in the entire Calamity Star cluster have been completely reduced to desolate dead zones. However, Luo Sha, once again leading the destroyer fleet to the 3rd star system, understood that the countless battles to come would likely be an extremely tough nut to crack. Regardless, Loki of Nurgle would absolutely not stand idly by and watch her corrupted territory, which she had painstakingly established in the real universe, be cleansed. She would undoubtedly devise various methods to obstruct them. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Soon after, the destroyer fleet, having just completed its warp jump and entered the 3rd star system, encountered a massive plague fleet that had been waiting for a long time. And judging by the green ships with thick hulls resembling the biological vessels of the Tyrannid, periodically displaying terrifying vitality, this seemed to be the main fleet of the Death Guard Legion. Indeed, as soon as the 2 fleets engaged, the unknown fleet master of the opposing force displayed a completely different offensive strategy from the previous Plague Fleet. The Plague Fleet, rapidly forming assault formations, endured the fierce bombardment of countless laser arrays and lance arrays, forcefully thrusting into the center of the destroyer fleet's formation. At this moment, Luo Sha, clad in vibranium power armor, stood with his massive body at the front of the flagship's bridge. His cold gaze constantly shifted between the countless green projections behind him and the cold void, finally discerning their offensive objective from the Plague Fleet's reckless actions. Perhaps it was due to the overly conspicuous presence of the supernormal planet-destroying Weapon Fortress Hero Tower in the previous battles that annihilated 2 star systems. Both the Nurgle demons and the Death Guard Legion, as Nurgle's followers, seemed intent on completely destroying the Hero Tower, which posed the greatest threat within the entire destroyer fleet, thereby returning the scale of this war to a state they were more familiar with. Seconds later, Luo Sha, whose thoughts were rapidly turning, immediately contacted Reditus and AI Stark via the communication channel, conveying his ideas to them. At the same time, the Plague Fleet, enduring countless lance and laser bombardments, continuously unleashed terrifying firepower towards the even larger Hero Tower, and countless explosive tremors gradually caused the Hero Tower's several large void shields to enter an overloaded state. And once the void shields completely disappeared, Chaos Assault boats, each carrying a large number of Death Guard, swiftly glided from the Plague Fleet into the depths of the Cold Void, rapidly launching a boarding action towards the Hero Tower. At this moment, even though Luo Sha knew that the Hero Tower stored a large number of Smart Control Legion and corresponding production lines, under the command of Reditus and AI Stark, the sheer quantity of Smart Control Legion alone was enough to resist and even eliminate a large number of Chaos Astartes. However, with a slight frown, he still quickly activated his Vibranium Power Armor, leading 5 Giant Raven Guard and 500 Primaris Astartes from the Ultramarines sub-chapter, using teleportation technology to reach the interior of the Hero Tower. Buzz, buzz, buzz. However, as soon as Luo Sha and his companions arrived inside the Hero Tower, they immediately saw countless Nurglings bouncing around in the wide corridors like green fleas. These disgusting chaos demon released countless green poisonous mists tainted with various deadly viruses into the air while launching powerful counterattacks against the large number of Smart Control Legion that were closing in. Even more surprisingly, amidst the countless bouncing Nurglings, there were also many Malinitas that occasionally let out sinister laughs. These golden masked Malinitas were still Nurgle's chaos demon. Their presence would bring various malfunctions and failures to all machinery and even metal creations. Clack, clack, clack. At this moment, almost every Primaris Astartes who tried to pull the trigger of their bolter found that their ranged weapon in their palm had uncharacteristically jammed. Even more unlucky Astartes found that the power armor worn on their tall bodies also experienced numerous highly improbable malfunctions. At this moment, Luo Sha, wearing a skull helmet, immediately issued the command for close quarters combat to everyone. He swiftly activated his Vibranium Power Armor, wielding the blood scythe in his palm, and charged into battle against the omnipresent Nurglings and Malinitas. In an instant, hundreds of Nurglings and Malinitas were instantly sliced, hacked, and trampled into putrid puddles of flesh by Luo Sha. And just as the surrounding Primaris Astartes also rapidly launched their melee attacks, squads of Death Guard Terminators carrying heavy firepower weapons revealed their pot-bellied, tall bodies and swiftly unleashed deadly firepower upon the Primaris Astartes. Immediately after, a massive figure, incredibly familiar to Luo Sha, also appeared within everyone's sight. Luo Sha, Typhus, the true master of the Death Guard Legion, Nurgle's herald, and first company captain, let out an angry roar that echoed all around, directed at Luo Sha, who was wielding the blood scythe. Heh heh, Typhus, I knew it was you. What, doesn't your father have the guts to face me? And he sent you, his filial son, to do it yourself. Luo Sha, who had forcefully crushed a Nurgling with his magnetic boots, abruptly halted his massive body. His cold gaze pierced through his helmet's eye slits as he stared intently at Typhus and spoke. Damn Primarch, go ahead and display your arrogance. My lord is very displeased with your foolish act of attacking the Calamity Star Cluster without permission. You will fall into our hands sooner or later, and when that happens, our countless brothers and sisters will serve you well. Typhus, continuously releasing countless destroyer swarms around his massive body, roared in a low voice. The next second, he swiftly propelled his massive body into an incredibly ferocious charge forward. A massive corrupted scythe, tightly gripped in his palm, came cleaving towards the front of Luo Sha's massive body. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Hung, hung, hung. The blood scythe, wielded continuously in Rog's palm, clashed violently again and again with Typhus's massive corrupted scythe, accompanied by extremely ear-piercing buzzing and shrieking. However, if it weren't for the large number of destroyer swarms, wrapped in black poisonous mist, repeatedly attacking Rog's front, he wouldn't even need to move his heavy steps back and forth. To some extent, Rog's combat power was now completely on a different level from Typhus. Besides the Chaos God's chief great demons and many traitor Primarchs, there were few targets he had to treat cautiously. Now, Rog felt almost no pressure dealing with ordinary great demons or even more Chaos Astartes. Tisk tisk, Typhus, it's been so long, why haven't you improved at all? No wonder Nurgle hasn't ascended you to demonhood. If this is all you're capable of, I don't think you can compare to my traitorous brother. Sons are just sons after all. At this moment, Rog, who could handle Typhus's frantic attacks with ease, once again displayed his Rogel Dorn-inherited make-complaints passive skill, and mocked him in a low voice. Roar. Instantly, Typhus, who was desperately wielding the massive corrupted scythe in his palm but couldn't pose much of a threat to the agile Rog, was clearly provoked by Rog's words. As soon as he finished speaking, he couldn't help but roar and move his magnetic boots. Typhus forcibly retracted the massive corrupted scythe that was locked with the blood scythe, and one hand had already silently reached behind him, taking out several vortex grenades. You bunch of good-for-nothing things. At this moment, the expression on Rog's face hidden inside the skull helmet suddenly changed. His massive body quickly activated the vibranium power armor and strode forward. A thick arm that suddenly extended rapidly fired the metal 10 rings bound to it. Dong dong dong. In an instant, Typhus's thick arm, along with the heavy armor outside, which was tightly holding several vortex grenades, was pierced one after another by the rapidly shot metal 10 rings, and countless foul-smelling blood, along with the severed arm, fell heavily to the ground. The next second, Rog, using Shadow Step, brushed past Typhus's massive body. And the blood scythe, which he casually held across the waist of the power armor, had instantly swept across the middle of the opponent's body. Heh, did you think that my being exiled back to the garden would be the end? The great-grandfather has already seen through your plans, and countless brothers and sisters are waiting for you ahead. We'll meet again next time, you damned Primarch. Typhus, whose upper body was slowly sliding down, said to Rog without turning his head. As soon as he finished speaking, Rog, who had suddenly turned the blood scythe, had already chopped off the opponent's entire head from the upper body. Too much nonsense. Do you think only the Emperor is protecting this crusade against the plague? The other Chaos Gods are also making small moves. Typhus, whether you believe it or not, my crusade will not fail. At this moment, Rog, slowly activating the vibranium power armor and turning around, lowered his head and looked down at Typhus's head, which was still twitching slightly. He said to the other party in a low voice, and at the same time raised a magnetic boot and forcibly crushed the broken head. The next second, Rog, taking a deep breath, suddenly activated the vibranium power armor and turned his attack direction. One buzzing metal 10 ring after another also quickly launched a continuous bombardment towards the Chaos Astartes present. He, like a humanoid titan, launched a massacre-style attack on some of the more troublesome Death Guard Terminators. Approximately several hours later, surrounded by countless smart-controlled legions, all the Death Guard who invaded the interior of Hero Tower were personally cleaned up by Rog and others. In the cold void, the vast Plague Fleet, which had engaged in a fierce naval battle with the destroyer fleet, after paying the price of 2/3 of its numbers in casualties, finally relied on the remaining ships to forcibly break through the fleet's encirclement and successfully disappeared into the void route. The more cautious Rog did not immediately order the fleet to pursue. The third star system had now become a super-large trap set by Nurgle against the expeditionary fleet. He had to proceed cautiously to achieve final victory. However, when Rog ordered the Battle Brothers to count the list of fallen personnel and directed the smart-controlled legions to clean up the traces of chaos corruption, bad news from Redditus made Rog frown again. Not long ago, at the same time that a large number of Death Guard led by Typhus launched a surprise attack on Rog and others, A large group of Gellerpox infected managed to bypass the heavy encirclement and successfully entered the storage space of the planet-destroying cannon, putting the star-destroying weapon into a state of countless malfunctions. In other words, in the next battle, unless Redditus and the AI Stark perform exceptionally well and can repair the planet-destroying cannon in a short time. Otherwise, Rob would only be able to rely on the old method to destroy the 7 Chaos planets in the third star system one by one. So, for the next period of time, the expeditionary fleet undertook a more important offensive task. One battlecruiser after another, carrying a large number of Astartes, under the heavy escort of Sword-class frigates and Cobra-class destroyers, launched an extremely fierce attack on the nearest Chaos planet. And after the countless defensive platforms on the near-Earth orbit of the Chaos planet and one Chaos ship after another were completely destroyed. A large number of near-Earth orbital bombardments from the expeditionary fleet could still turn the Chaos planet into a wasteland. However, just as the number of Chaos planets in the third star system gradually decreased, a terrifying plague called Gellerpox also began to spread throughout the expeditionary fleet. According to a rough estimate by survivors, in just one night, about dozens of mortal captains were unfortunately reduced to victims of the Gellerpox, and a large number of mortal crew members under their command also became staggering Nurgle monsters. This sudden and enormous change forced Rog to temporarily postpone the plan to continue attacking the Chaos planets. Instead, he led the Primaris Astartes to clean up the Chaos corruption inside the expeditionary fleet. In Rog's eyes, this was a conspiracy by the evil god Nurgle against the expeditionary fleet. But in order to maintain the fighting morale within the expeditionary fleet and reduce unnecessary sacrifices, he had to wield the bloody butcher knife towards the many mortal crew members who had been corrupted by the Gellerpox. Inside the private chambers of the Primarch, located in the upper deck of the battle barge, Leviathan, teams of automatic servo robots, their mechanical tentacles waving, were rinsing the vibranium power armor, which was covered in countless shattered pieces of flesh and blood, on a dismantling platform using a special liquid mixed with a large amount of disinfectant and holy water. On the metal throne, Luo Sha, dressed only in casual clothes on his massive body, was listening to the increasingly burly Carcharodon's Captain Tyberos report to him. My Lord Primarch, judging from the current situation within the fleet alone, the unexpected appearance of the Gellerpox has caused heavy losses to countless mortals. Out of hundreds of ships of various sizes, at least several strike cruisers, hundreds of sword-class frigates, and Cobra destroyers were temporarily shut down, and nearly 3 million mortal crew members and ordinary servants had to be personally slaughtered by us. Fortunately, as of now, 4 battle barges and more than 20 strike cruisers, due to carrying a large number of priest brothers internally, had the Gellerpox discovered before it could fully spread. This is a blessing in disguise, and the number and combat strength of tens of thousands of Astartes have suffered virtually no losses. At this moment, Tyberos's low voice had just fallen. Luo Sha's nostrils flared slightly, and he took a deep breath, instinctively narrowing his eyes. He stared with emotionless, cold eyes at the vibranium power armor being meticulously cleaned, then said to Tyberos below him, "Has the expedition fleet reached the point of being severely weakened? I don't think so yet. However, the loss of a large number of mortal crew members has caused significant problems with the basic operation of some ships. Even if I temporarily manufacture a large number of automatic servo robots on the production line inside the Hero Tower, it won't be enough to fill more combat position vacancies. The resulting chain reaction is that we have temporarily lost the ability to destroy Chaos planets with super-standard terrifying firepower. In other words, Nurgle's forces are forcing us to engage them in ground-based landing combat. Since they want to experience the power of the power sword and bolter so much, then let's satisfy them. Tyberos, immediately notify the Ultramarines and their numerous successor warbands, as well as the Astartes veterans within our legion. For the next 6 Chaos planets, we will use the old method, gnawing them down little by little." With indifference in his brows, Luo Sha merely lowered his head in thought for a moment before issuing the cruel order to Tyberos below him. Although Luo Sha, as a Primarch, genuinely felt pained by the Astartes' battle losses. However, facing the current reality and the only opportunity to completely expel Nurgle's forces from Ultramar, he had no choice but to show the inhumane side of a Primarch to his many sons. In fact, Luo Sha, who had successfully liberated a warp essence, also vaguely foresaw through countless psychic abilities. If he wanted to successfully seal or expel Rainfather Rodriguez, he would have to risk stepping into the den of danger Nurgle had prepared for him. Seconds later, Tiberos, bowing in salute, swiftly piloted his Terminator armor out of the private chambers. A familiar figure wearing a sacred shield Terminator on his tall body brushed past him, then quickly came before Luo Sha. Librarian Kadoran of the Grey Knights Warband greets Dark Side Regent, my Lord Luo Sha. Long time no see, Kadoran. How is the Great Unclean One of Nurgle's sealing plan I asked you to secretly prepare progressing? Luo Sha, his eyelids slightly closed, shifted his massive body and asked him in a low tone. Facing the inquiry from my Lord Primarch. Kadoran, full of confidence, nodded and said, my Lord Primarch, nearly 50 battle brothers of the Grey Knights' 7th Brotherhood have made all preparations for sealing the Great Unclean One of Nurgle. Both the large number of exorcism runes that can be freely activated by psychic powers and the sealing ritual tools have been successfully completed. Even to be safe, I specifically contacted some of your untouchables. Although I ultimately confirmed that the untouchable named Deadpool has severe mental problems, as long as he doesn't perform abnormally, he will have a huge suppressive effect on the Great Unclean One of Nurgle. Very good, I trust your judgment. Kadoran, have your Grey Knights brothers ready for battle at any time. In the upcoming battles, I will summon you to the field when the time is right. At this moment, Luo Sha, slowly opening his eyes, said calmly to Librarian Kadoran. His cold gaze watched the other person completely leave his field of vision before closing again. And just beneath the skin of Luo Sha's face, where even he himself couldn't detect it, strands of dark red, intricate patterns flashed within. Boom boom boom. Within the murky atmosphere, everywhere covered in green toxic mist, landing pods, their heavy outer shells wreathed in streaks of fire, were rapidly descending towards the surface of the Chaos Planet. This Chaos Planet, now occupied by Nurgle demons for the longest time, was precisely the origin point where the Calamity Star Cluster was completely corrupted. In fact, for Luo Sha's expedition fleet to reach this point today, they had already paid the price of war on the first 6 Chaos planets of the 3rd star system, with millions of mortals and 1,500 Astartes fallen. Bang bang bang. At this moment, countless venomous shells, fired by massive demon engines constantly adjusting their firing angles, exploded around the numerous landing pods. Even if some unlucky landing pods were completely torn into metal wreckage by the force of the explosions, it still couldn't stop the increasing number of landing pods from smashing down heavily from the sky onto the ground. Thump thump thump. In an instant, Astartes, each armed with a bolter and melee weapons, and even carrying more heavy firepower, swiftly piloted their power armor out of the opened landing pods. Using combat squads as their basic units, they coordinated seamlessly to unleash continuous suppressive fire on all Nurgle demons within their targeting reticles. At the same time, some combat squads also rapidly advanced their positions, clearing a sufficiently wide landing zone for the subsequent arrival of vehicle units. Buzz buzz buzz. Not long after, beneath the battlefield where countless corrupted shells and whirlwind missiles intertwined, with the appearance of streaks of azure blue teleportation barriers, thousands of land raiders and Leman Russ tanks instantly arrived on the planet's surface, which was full of putrid swamps. And as soon as they appeared, they immediately rotated their turrets and joined the fierce assault on countless Nurgle demons, continuously barraging large areas of the Chaos enemies' positions with extremely terrifying firepower. Meanwhile, among the countless Nurgle demons assaulting like a green tide, a large number of very conspicuous figures from the Death Guard Chaos Astartes also vaguely revealed themselves. These traitors, under the strong cover of the Nurgle demons, launched fierce assaults time and time again using extremely ancient offensive tactics against the many Astartes who were maintaining the defensive line. Some extent, the final battle between the two sides entered a white-hot, frenzied state from the very beginning. For the Nurgle demons, this chaotic planet was now their last refuge not yet destroyed by the expedition fleet. If they were unfortunately defeated, not only would the Nurgle demons have to return to the depths of the warp, but it would also be as difficult as ascending to the heavens to obtain similar corrupted star systems in the real universe next time. For the Dark Side Regent's expedition fleet, if the Calamity Star Cluster was successfully recovered by them, even if it could only be used for salvaging minerals in the future, it would be a great victory worth deeply remembering by the populace for the current human empire and Ultramar. It could also allow countless Imperial worlds struggling in the Imperium Nihilus to see a glimmer of hope, proving that the Emperor on the Golden Throne and even the Divine Sons had not abandoned them. Rumble. As countless Nurgle demons and Astartes fought back and forth, hundreds of immensely massive demon engines suddenly appeared on the chaotic battlefield. Teams of Primaris Terminators, clad in new Terminator armor, immediately advanced with heavy firepower weapons, undertaking the difficult task of beheading the demon engines. A dozen formations of Leman Russ tanks also quickly turned their dark muzzles, launching continuous and fierce bombardments at the slowly advancing demon engines. Drip. However, at this moment, fine rain suddenly began to fall from the sky, which was already filled with a large amount of green poisonous mist. Then, the continuous drizzle quickly turned into a torrential downpour like a waterfall. Countless heavy vehicles speeding across the battlefield fell into the foul-smelling mire, becoming metallic targets trapped in place, allowing a large number of Nurgle demons to completely surround them. A large number of Death Guard also took the opportunity to intensify their attacks against the Astartes, causing the Imperial Forces' positions to rapidly contract. Thump thump thump. The next second, a great unclean one of Nurgle, whose massive body stood majestically like a mountain tens of meters high. With a constantly smiling mouth on its festering, bloated belly, it suddenly revealed its terrifying form. This opponent was Rainfather Rodigus, whom Luo Sha had been thinking about for a long time. I guess Kugas will definitely be crying to Father Nurgle in the garden. He still can't join this joyful battlefield and can only weep with that big moth, regretting why he didn't listen to my advice back then. The grinning Rainfather Rodigus gazed at the Imperial forces that were temporarily retreating due to the sour, foul-smelling rain. He couldn't help but let out a low murmur from his large, blister-covered mouth. Sizzle. However, at this moment, a drop of acid rain, rapidly condensing into sparkling ice shards, suddenly fell on Rainfather Rodigus's plump face, causing him to pause slightly. It's freezing. How is this possible? Just as Rainfather Rodigus felt a slight confusion about the sudden drop in temperature. Layers of freezing aura, like surging waves, instantly rushed in from afar. In just a moment, it completely froze countless Nurgle demons treading in the foul-smelling muddy water and the vast rain clouds covering hundreds of kilometers around. The next second, with the humming roar from the propulsion device, a massive figure, clad in a pale gold vibranium power armor, with a cold ice treasure box held in one of his huge hands, suddenly traversed the sky, and his entire body heavily landed within Rainfather Rodigus's line of sight. Heh, another fat guy, have you great unclean one of Nurgle missed me? At this moment, Luo Sha, wearing a skull helmet, quickly wielded the cold ice treasure box, aiming it firmly at the immensely massive Rainfather Rodigus. Immediately after, waves of freezing aura, capable of plunging an entire planet into ice and snow, instantly spewed out from within, and completely froze the great unclean one of Nurgle attempting to charge at Luo Sha in place. To deal with Rainfather Rodigus, Luo Sha specifically asked Reditus for the native artifact he had obtained back then, the cold ice treasure box. Kadoran, it's your turn. Luo Sha, taking a deep breath, immediately roared in a low voice into the communication channel. Buzz buzz buzz. In an instant, with the reappearance of countless teleportation barriers, nearly 50 Grey Knights, led by Librarian Kadoran, instantly arrived around Rainfather Rodriguez, heavily surrounding his massive body. Subsequently, exorcism runes and sealing ritual tools quickly appeared in the huge palms of every Grey Knight. And the uninterrupted chanting of prayers, accompanied by a large amount of psychic fluctuations, completely enveloped the great unclean one of Nurgle's massive body. Thump thump thump. At this moment, it seemed that Rainfather Rodriguez's unfortunate entrapment had caused more Nurgle demons to fall into a state of extreme agitation. A large number of Nurgle demons from other areas, led by 77 Great Unclean One of Nurgle, quickly appeared at the edge of the chaotic battlefield. Luo Sha, wearing a skull helmet, immediately shifted his gaze. He glanced at the Astartes fighting back and forth with the Death Guard Legion in the distance. He then issued an order to the 5 giant Raven Guards who had just arrived. You are responsible for keeping an eye on Rainfather Rodriguez. If he is not successfully sealed, then expel him with the Grey Knights. If you really can't defeat him, then hold him back with your lives until I return. As soon as Luo Sha finished speaking, he quickly activated the propulsion device located at the rear of his vibranium power armor. His entire massive body suddenly lifted off the ground, and after changing direction, he flew towards the great unclean one of Nurgle and Nurgle demons who were rushing in from the edge of the battlefield. Sizzle. When Luo Sha quickly arrived above the support force composed of countless Nurgle demons, one of his huge hands moved slightly, and waves of noticeably weaker freezing aura suddenly sprayed out from the cold ice treasure box, scattering light cold magic over the heads of a large number of Nurgle demons. The next moment, Luo Sha, with the Dawnbreaker suddenly appearing in one of his huge palms, began to use the cold ice treasure box's freezing aura to restrain the more threatening Great Unclean One of Nurgle. His massive body also landed on the cold, hard ground, wielding the Dawnbreaker to smash one Great Unclean One of Nurgle after another into frozen residue. Roar roar roar. At the same time, faint, fine cracks vaguely appeared within the super-large ice block encasing Rainfather Rodriguez. More than 50 Grey Knights immediately accelerated their chanting of prayers and the release of their psychic powers. And the giant Raven Guards, who had been on guard against this Great Unclean One of Nurgle, exchanged glances with each other, then all transformed into their even more powerful giant forms in advance. And then, from behind their specialized power armor, which was undergoing extensive structural deformation, they each drew out a two-handed power greatsword, firmly locking the gleaming sword tips onto Rainfather Rodriguez, who seemed on the verge of breaking free from his restraints. Sizzle, sizzle. Wave after wave of bone-chilling freezing aura rapidly froze large numbers of Nurgle demons within a radius of several tens of kilometers. This massive Chaos Demon army, personally led by 77 Great Unclean One of Nurgle, was firmly held at the edge of the entire battlefield by the Primarch alone. Boom. In an instant, Luo Sha, wearing a skull helmet, forcefully activated his vibranium power armor. As his massive body surged forward like a golden lightning bolt, his feet, repeatedly stomping the ground, had already unleashed Shadow Step. The next second, the Dawnbreaker, enveloped in wisps of pitch-black shadow, whistled with an extremely terrifying sound. The heavy hammerhead swiftly swept past a dozen Great Unclean One of Nurgle, who were firmly bound in place by the freezing aura, completely shattering the bloated heads of the demons before him into countless bloody flesh and ice shards. Thump, thump, thump. But at this moment, Luo Sha, who was rapidly activating his vibranium power armor to continuously leap and dodge dozens of corrupted great swords and a large amount of Nurgle sorcery, suddenly found that everything within his optical scope had completely turned a very bloody dark red. Even within his massive body, some unknown special changes instantly occurred. Wisps of dark red mist continuously emanated outwards from within the vibranium power armor. What's going on? A blessing from Khorne. I have a bad feeling about this. This is probably far more than just a Loki's blessing. The war god's divinity, which was originally dormant, is recovering at a visible speed. Even with a simple thought, I know there's a problem. At this moment, Luo Sha, who reacted incredibly quickly, had no choice but to multitask. He forcefully swung the Dawnbreaker in his palm, whose destructive power had suddenly increased greatly, engaging in back-and-forth clashes with the surrounding Great Unclean One of Nurgle, while also rapidly analyzing the unexpected situation he encountered in his mind. To some extent, Luo Sha was not surprised by the intervention of other Chaos gods in this calamity expedition targeting Nurgle's forces. Even if he received blessings from the Blood God or the Master of Schemes, he had already prepared himself mentally. However, the unusual movement of the war god's divinity and the special feeling it brought gradually raised a hint of worry in Luo Sha, who was always extremely wary of chaos. And this worry was not groundless. Instead, it was a warning brought to Luo Sha by a fleeting psychic premonition. As is well known, the chaos gods are emotional aggregates born deep within the high heavens. For example, the blood god Khorne represents countless negative emotional concepts that various races would possess, such as cruelty, bloodlust, tyranny, hatred, slaughter, and death. But at the same time, Khorne's existence also symbolizes many positive emotional concepts such as courage, strength, honor, and justice. In other words, the many emotional concepts in the Warhammer universe are actually under the control of the Chaos Gods. This is also the warning that Psychic Premonition brought to Luo Sha. Because Khorne also governs the concepts of war and strategy, all wars and massacres occurring in the universe will bring him endless conceptual power. And Luo Sha currently possesses a war god's divinity that has not yet fully recovered. If the blood god was willing to sacrifice a slight loss of conceptual power to forcefully infuse a large amount of blessing power into the war god's divinity, then the current Luo Sha would most likely be elevated on the spot to become Khorne's first lesser god. Although Luo Sha did not know if such a special situation had occurred over tens of thousands of years. It was not a losing proposition for the blood god. If he fortunately won the gamble, he would not only strike at the Emperor and the human empire, who opposed chaos, but also gain a powerful Primarch he had long desired. Even if he unfortunately failed, he lost nothing. Instead, he further probed the Emperor and Luo Sha's true strength and relationship. Rumble, rumble. At this moment, more and more dark red mist continuously wrapped around Luo Sha's massive body, quickly suppressing the pitch-black shadow that had originally appeared on his surface. The power and destructiveness of the Dawnbreaker, which he held tightly in his palm and repeatedly struck the Great Unclean One of Nurgle with, showed a cliff-like increase. Even with just one strike, a Great Unclean One of Nurgle who failed to dodge was completely shattered into countless pieces of flesh. But at the same time, Luo Sha, whose consciousness remained clear, could also clearly feel the entire real universe releasing an extremely powerful repulsive force towards him, as if it wanted to completely cast him into the depths of the warp. I knew it. Even choosing to ascend to godhood comes with a heavy price. If I can't immediately control the recovering war god's divinity now, I'm afraid I'll enter the warp as a chaos lesser god, and it will be difficult to step into the real universe again for the rest of my life. I can't delay any longer. If necessary, I can abandon the war god's divinity. Emperor, protect me. Old man, come save me. At this moment, Luo Sha, who had resolutely made an important choice, immediately began to pray and shout continuously to the Emperor from the bottom of his heart. The next second, wisps of incomparably surging golden fire suddenly shot out from within his massive body. Luo Sha, wearing a skull helmet, seemed to feel his entire tough body being completely thrown into scorching lava. A taste of pain far exceeding anything he had experienced before made him swing the Dawnbreaker in his palm like a madman, completely shattering the Great Unclean One of Nurgle, who were close at hand, into bloody remnants. At the same time, countless terrifying flames, a fusion of dark red and golden, rapidly spread to everything around them. The first to suffer were naturally the Nurgle demons bound in place by the freezing aura. They were almost instantly burned into scattered white ashes by wave after wave of terrifying flames. Next was Rainfather Rodigus, who had just broken free from the heavy restraints of the giant ice chunks and was already engaged in fierce combat with the giant Raven Guard and the Grey Knights. However, at this moment, the snarling opponent suddenly shook his bloated, fat head. His small eyes, full of fear, stared intently at the terrifying flames surging like a tide. Rainfather Rodigus instinctively let out a deep roar that echoed across the battlefield. No! In an instant, the terrifying waves of flames, a fusion of countless dark red and golden, completely engulfed the great unclean one of Nurgle. And what was even more astonishing was that, whenever these terrifying flames, capable of destroying Chaos Great Demon, approached the Astartes, it was always the golden fire within the terrifying flames that swept past their tall bodies. Even the incomparably violent dark red flames seemed to consciously avoid the locations of more Imperial troops. Soon after, the terrifying flames, which had almost swept across the entire battlefield, completely incinerated all the Nurgle demons. And Luo Sha, whose chaos blessings and divine power within his massive body seemed to have been completely emptied, had no choice but to activate his vibranium power armor and kneel on one knee. He couldn't help but let out an extremely violent gasp from within his skull helmet. Although Rainfather Rodigus miraculously escaped the Grey Knight's sealing ritual, he was still banished back into the depths of the warp by the terrifying flames raging everywhere. Luo Sha also believed that the double critical strike from the Emperor and Khorne would be enough to keep him silent for a considerable period. On the battlefield, with the complete dissipation of numerous great unclean one of Nurgle and even Nurgle demons, some of the remaining Death Guard immediately became special targets for the full assault of countless Astartes. By the time Luo Sha, whose massive body was completely exhausted, was carefully helped up by several giant Raven Guard, there was no longer any sign of Nurgle's forces on the battlefield. This also marked the complete curtain call for the final large-scale war of the Calamity Expedition. Not long after, large numbers of automatic servo robots descended from the Hero Tower onto the battlefield. They fully assisted the priest brothers of various warbands in collecting uncontaminated gene seed and excavating and organizing the shattered remains of many battle brothers. On the way back to the fleet's flagship, Luo Sha, whose massive body was seated inside a Thunderhawk transport, had just swallowed several panacea but couldn't help but frown. For some unknown reason, the panacea, which had always been effective, only restored a minimal amount of Luo Sha's stamina, leaving him with a persistent feeling of weakness from the depths of his soul. Perhaps it's because of the Emperor's intervention, the war god's divinity was merely purified, not completely shattered, and even the chaos blessings infused within should have been replaced by the Emperor's power. However, how long will this feeling of weakness surrounding my body last? With my current strength and stamina, I can't even lift Dawnbreaker. I'm really not used to this incredibly fragile mortal state. At this moment, Luo Sha, whose vibranium hand subconsciously stroked the Warhammer's handle, couldn't help but think. But then he adjusted his mindset and focused all his attention more on his body's recovery state. In fact, Luo Sha had also guessed that forcibly interrupting Khorne's so-called deification process would inevitably come with some painful consequences. However, facing the threats of becoming an eternal puppet of the Chaos Gods and being unable to set foot in the real universe again, Luo Sha did not regret any of his previous decisions. In the depths of the cold void, one massive metal vessel after another, maintaining defensive formations, slowly sailed along an invisible route led by the Hero Tower. The expedition fleet, having completely ended the Calamity Expedition and annihilated Nurgle's forces, was on its way back to Macragge. Unfortunately, the cost of millions of mortals and over 2,500 Astartes casualties in the entire campaign significantly diminished everyone's joy of victory. But this is the human empire's way of survival in the cold galaxy for tens of thousands of years, exchanging countless wars and sacrifices for extremely brief periods of peace and opportunities for development. At this moment, in the upper deck of the battle barge, the Leviathan, within the Primarch's private palace, under the silent gaze of various Astartes battle group chapter masters and even Legion company captains, Luo Sha, whose massive body was still clad in vibranium power armor, was lifted high by a team of uniformly moving automatic servo robots with mechanical tentacles and carefully placed onto a massive metal throne. Luo Sha took a deep breath and managed to adjust his body's posture, letting out a fleeting, low sigh. After returning to the fleet, he immediately summoned all priest brothers and librarian brothers from the Ultramarines sub-warbands to examine his internal injuries. However, after a lengthy series of tests and examinations, they announced good news to the frowning Luo Sha. There were no injuries within Luo Sha's body. Instead, his entire constitution was gradually undergoing changes far beyond imagination. His massive body seemed to have just undergone a cellular and molecular level renewal and reshaping, and the so-called weakness stemmed from this. If no unforeseen circumstances occurred, the next time Luo Sha stood up again, both his physical indicators and immeasurable combat power would significantly increase, undoubtedly placing him among the upper echelons of the Primarchs. But this also meant that Luo Sha would remain in this half-dead state for a long time, unable to personally participate in any battles, only able to sit alone on the metal throne and conduct remote control. It could be said that currently, Luo Sha, apart from being conscious, was in some ways not much different from the Emperor on the Golden Throne. Although Luo Sha was not entirely satisfied with this, he ultimately accepted the reality with resignation. Soon after, when the massive vessels with their battle-scarred metal armor returned to Macragge, Luo Sha, as the Dark Side Regent, did not participate in the expedition victory ceremony held by countless civilians in Astartes. He sat alone in his dimly lit private hall, silently contemplating his next battle plan. Subsequently, Luo Sha remotely commanded the members of the Legion, with the full assistance of the Adeptus Mechanicus, to accelerate the maintenance of numerous damaged vessels, while also conducting more detailed basic modifications and reconstruction of the Hero Tower, a war fortress capable of destroying planets. In fact, even though Luo Sha was still immobile, his rapidly turning, active mind made him realize that the Legion had stayed in Ultramar long enough. And the entire human empire was not just Ultramar. Even within the Ultima Segmentum, many human planets were struggling in the Imperium Nihilus, praying for the arrival of gene-seed Primarchs and even Angels of the Empire. Therefore, once all the vessels and war fortresses of the 22 Legion had largely completed their modifications, maintenance, and resupply, Luo Sha, in his official capacity as Dark Side Regent, temporarily conscripted a company from the Ultramarines chapter into his legion. The company captain leading them was none other than Captain Titus, whom Luo Sha had personally met before. As for more sub-warbands belonging to the Ultramarines, due to the heavy casualties they suffered in this calamity expedition, they needed more time to complete their replenishment. Therefore, the merciful Luo Sha did not include them in his considerations. As time continued to pass, Luo Sha, having confirmed that all preparations were complete, issued the order for the fleet to continue its long-distance cruise. And the 22 Legion, renowned by countless Macragge citizens as the Calamity Legion, once again embarked on their long journey. Meanwhile, Luo Sha, still immobile, after collecting and compiling a large amount of intelligence from various parts of the human empire, quickly made a series of plans for future combat objectives. The Calamity Legion would save all human worlds it could along the way. The fleet's next mission objective was to traverse the entire Ultima Segmentum and support Regent Guilliman's Indomitus crusade. Within the Cold Void, one Cobra-class destroyer or Sword-class frigate, each carrying a squad of Astartes, repeatedly departed from within the Legion fleet. It was said that at the fleet's peak, 50 ships were simultaneously engaged in either incredibly difficult or remarkably easy combat support missions on completely different Imperial worlds. This also allowed a large number of Astartes' new recruits, who had just arrived from their home worlds, to quickly mature into battle-hardened veterans. Most of the veterans, who formed the backbone of the Legion, either unfortunately died in battle or, after suffering severe injuries, chose to undergo Primaris conversion to enhance their strength. Fortunately, under the influence of various auxiliary medications such as numerous heart-shaped grass and super soldier serum from their homeworld, the risk of Primaris conversion surgery was gradually reduced to about 10%. Even if someone was unlucky enough to fail the Primaris conversion, there was still the panacea available to restore physical injuries, preventing them from dying on the operating table immediately. And this monotonous and boring life had become the daily routine for the Astartes in the fleet. Each company engaged in live fire training with other companies, boarded ships to participate in battles, and then either died in sacrifice or successfully returned. Then, during training breaks, they waited for the next combat mission to arrive, only truly ending when they fell in battle. And this was the fate of countless Astartes, to devote themselves entirely to the Emperor, the Primarchs, and the human empire, even unto death. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Inside the Primarch's private palace, Luo Sha's massive body sat upon an incredibly vast metal throne. Within this dimly lit, spacious room, a hypercube labyrinth, slowly emitting a green glow, was tightly clutched in his large hand. At this moment, Luo Sha's eyes were slightly closed. His consciousness was mobilizing a large amount of shadow power to infuse this hypercube labyrinth, which he had taken from the hand model king and never returned. And within the labyrinthine prison, Protagonist, whose massive metal body resembled a small mountain, spoke indifferently, "I say, you've tried thousands of times, and you still have no intention of giving up completely. It's no wonder I lost to you, your stubbornness and mental fortitude might be several times stronger than mine." As his words fell, a blurry figure entirely condensed from shadow power stood firmly within Protagonist's line of sight. "Protagonist, it seems environment can indeed change a person. Isn't your attitude much better now than before? It's a pity you've already undergone Demon Prince transformation, otherwise, I could have let you out for a walk, don't you think?" Luo Sha, who was fully maintaining his shadow clone, said faintly to him. "Luo Sha, stop being so hypocritical. If it weren't for you and that damned Demon Prince Fulgrim repeatedly inflicting severe injuries on me back then, causing me, a Primarch, to enter a near-death state multiple times, why would I have had to rely on the great power of undivided chaos to save my life? Do you really think my hatred for you can last for 10,000 years? It would be more fitting if it were Rogel Dorn, you, a little guy, are simply not worthy." Protagonist's face, entirely composed of metal, subconsciously showed a deep-seated disgust as his cold gaze fixed on Luo Sha's shadow clone. However, before he could continue speaking, the clone, condensed from countless shadow power, completely dissipated into the air. Yet, the next moment, another shadow clone rapidly appeared before Protagonist. "HMPH, you lasted a few seconds longer than last time. Luo Sha, since you have so much time to waste with me here, I guess there must be a problem with your body outside this space. What, were you beaten into a severe injury? Why don't you tell me so I can have a laugh?" Protagonist, whose massive metal body remained motionless, sneered at Luo Sha's shadow clone. But Luo Sha no longer had much interest in the other party's taunts. He was concentrating all his thoughts on studying the duration of the shadow clone. Click. At this moment, a sudden flash of inspiration in his mind, Luo Sha quickly pulled out the reality stone, which glowed with a dark red luster, from his storage space. He unhesitatingly threw the reality stone into the hypercube labyrinth, and then completely enveloped the entire reality stone with the rapidly dissipating shadow clone. The Mind Stone can only be used as an energy weapon in the Warhammer universe, and the Reality Stone, without the cooperation of other stones, cannot even function as an energy weapon. But now, the Reality Stone can actually display a hint of its power when enveloped by a large amount of shadow power, allowing me to fully maintain the shadow clone. How is this possible? What is the principle behind accidentally triggering this mechanism? Gradually excited, Luo Sha immediately remotely controlled the shadow clone inside the hypercube labyrinth to slowly raise its hands. He made a discriminatory gesture towards Protagonist, who was not far away. At this moment, although Protagonist, with his stable emotions, did not immediately go berserk, the expression on his metal face clearly became even more unsightly. "Luo Sha, are you trying to pick a fight with me? I don't think this shadow clone of yours will last much longer." Protagonist, with an unfriendly expression, stared intently at the shadow clone, whose body and facial features were gradually becoming clearer, and roared in an incredibly low voice. However, Luo Sha, in a much better mood, did not choose to fight Protagonist. While surveying the continuously appearing pitch-black shadow limbs, he spoke to the other party. "Protagonist, I know you've cobbled together a few Iron Ring robots using the metal scraps inside the Hypercube labyrinth and some active metal from your own body, but believe me, even if you defeat my shadow clone, you won't be able to get out. This is a super prison that the space Necrons used to imprison fragments of star gods. If you stay here honestly and occasionally reflect on your past actions, I can still come and chat with you often. But if you insist on not acting like a human, like an irrational metal beast, destroying everything and trying to escape the labyrinth, then I'll truly be too lazy to bother with you. At this moment, Luo Sha's words made Perturabo, whose cold eyes flickered back and forth, temporarily extinguish the idea of getting up to fight. He slowly separated 3 Iron Ring robots from within his massive metal body, and they all stood on the nearby metal floor. Haha, I didn't expect a few robots without any weapons or equipment to threaten you. Luo Sha, your shadow clone seems to have been successfully experimented on. Are you planning to leave the labyrinth now? Perturabo, with a slightly submissive, low voice, said to Luo Sha's shadow clone. Luo Sha's shadow clone slowly shook its head. We loyalist Primarchs are all fated to toil, far from being as selfish and self-centered as you traitors. Many times, we have no choice but to bear the difficult responsibilities bestowed upon us by the Emperor, and this is something you rebels will never understand. Remember to reflect. See you next time. Now, Luo Sha, temporarily trapped on the metal throne, finally found a way to temporarily escape. His shadow clone, with the reality stone as its sole anchor, successfully detached from the interior of the Hypercube labyrinth. Luo Sha, seated on the metal throne, exchanged a glance with his shadow clone standing below. He smiled slightly, then slowly closed his eyes, completely immersing his consciousness, just as he would when controlling the T-Online Divine Beast. Thus, for a long time thereafter, whether within the fleet or on the individual support ships, the shadow clone would occasionally appear, conducting remote distance tests. The elusive shadow clone even made many Astartes or mortal crew members believe they were experiencing mental issues. Finally, Luo Sha, having completed the entire test, discovered that as long as the reality stone was not completely separated from the shadow clone, he could use his consciousness to control this psychic body, which was immune to physical attacks, to go anywhere. As a result, Luo Sha, who could not sit still, immediately activated the prayer support that had not been deployed for a long time. His shadow clone began leading 5 giant Raven Guard, clad in vibranium specialized power armor, to initiate one descent after another. And as time continued to pass, more and more golden throne coins were successfully collected by Luo Sha. When the number of throne coins Luo Sha possessed reached 39, he and the 5 giant Raven Guard, whose combat styles had become increasingly seasoned, stepped through a portal into an unfamiliar fleet. However, before Luo Sha and his companions could find the commander within the fleet, thump, 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 following a series of heavy footsteps, growing louder as they approached. A custodian, whose tall body was covered in golden power armor, appeared in their field of vision, holding a power lance. Stop your steps, you detestable abominations. At this moment, the custodian loudly reprimanded the giant Raven Guard, whose size and armor type did not conform to the Astartes Codex, and Luo Sha, who looked more like some kind of psychic creature. But Luo Sha did not offer any explanation. Instead, he raised his hand and, from one of his palms, conjured a giant scythe with tendrils of shadow power. He swiftly charged towards the custodian, engaging in an extremely fierce weapon clash on the spot. Due to the lack of bloodline connection, Luo Sha, facing friendly forces who completely distrusted their identities, was too lazy to waste more words. The only way to quickly bridge the gap between them was to first knock the opponent to the ground and then amicably explain their identity. And this was precisely the coping skill Luo Sha had honed through countless special situations in the dozens of prayer support missions recently. Boom, boom, boom. Tens of seconds later, even though this custodian was an elite figure whose combat power far surpassed that of an ordinary Astartes, facing a Primarch's clone with incredibly rich combat experience and immunity to physical attacks, The opponent could only be completely disarmed by Luo Sha, and he was heavily struck down onto the metal floor. I am the Dark Side Regent of the Human Empire, the 22 Primarch Luo Sha, and this is just a shadow clone I sent down. Do you know who I am? If not, then you should catch up on your studies. Luo Sha, in his shadow state, looked down at the custodian before him. Please forgive my arrogance and impoliteness, my Lord Dark Side Regent. I actually noticed your arrival long ago, and I came here just now to experience the difference between a custodian and a Primarch. At this moment, the custodian, slowly activating his power armor to rise from the floor, spoke earnestly to Luo Sha. This is just a shadow clone. If there's an opportunity, I will definitely let you witness what a Primarch truly is. Luo Sha, narrowing his eyes, gazed deeply at the other party and said in a very calm tone. Next, everyone walked towards the bridge. And Luo Sha also inquired about the custodian's current mission and intelligence, as he led the way. Through the custodian's slow narration, Luo Sha learned that this was a torchbearer fleet specifically responsible for transporting Primaris Astartes. A batch of Primaris Astartes belonging to the Black Templars was about to be sent to an expeditionary force to replenish the Astartes casualties they had sustained. Originally, this should have been a sure thing for the custodian. However, since Luo Sha had arrived here now, it meant that the custodian's mission was not that simple. Soon after, everyone finally reached the bridge. However, just as Luo Sha, in his shadow state, had barely set one foot onto the metal floor inside the bridge room, the tendrils of shadow power that maintained the entire shadow clone quickly dissipated. Immediately after, Luo Sha, reacting incredibly quickly, saw two Sisters of Silence walking towards him, intending to salute him. Wait, sisters. Stop your steps, and from now on, absolutely do not approach my shadow clone. Luo Sha, whose massive body outline quickly blurred at the edges, immediately issued the command. At this moment, the two Sisters of Silence, who instinctively exchanged glances, first offered an apology to Luo Sha with a silent gesture, and then their entire bodies immediately moved their power armor to retreat backward. And this was the only weakness of Luo Sha's shadow clone. That is, he was completely unable to make any degree of contact with an untouchable. Even if the Reality Stone provided a strong foundation for the shadow clone's long-term existence. Shadow power was still a psychic force, naturally and firmly suppressed by untouchables, not to mention the Sisters of Silence, who were among the best of them. Buzz. By the time the two Sisters of Silence were about 100 meters away from the shadow clone, Luo Sha's special state completely stabilized. He subconsciously controlled the shadow clone, which didn't need to breathe, to exhale, then turned his head and whispered to the custodian, who was observing carefully from the side. Why do you have Sisters of Silence accompanying your torchbearer fleet? If any unexpected situation occurs later, ultimately causing my shadow clone to unfortunately collapse, then none of you should approach my vicinity, because these 5 giant Raven Guard will personally retrieve a powerful artifact I use to support the shadow clone. If you rush forward, they will certainly consider you enemies who are preventing the retrieval of the artifact. My Lord Dark Side Regent, we are not ignorant mortals nor Astartes without honor. We will certainly obey all your commands. At this moment, the custodian, with little emotional change in his facial expression, said in a deep voice towards Luo Sha. Moreover, our fleet is not far from the Black Templars' expeditionary force. Do you have any further commands to add regarding this? As the torchbearer fleet continuously approached the rendezvous point, ahead on the Void route, an expedition fleet composed of 2 strike cruisers, 11 sword-class frigates, and several large transport and supply vessels appeared. This was precisely the Black Templars' expeditionary force, which had been fighting in this star sector for decades under the leadership of Marshal Angvian. Soon after, the fleets of both sides exchanged several communications and finally began their rendezvous operation towards a cold void coordinate. The important news that Dark Side Regent Luo Sha had arrived with the Torchbearer fleet was also temporarily communicated to Marshal Angvian. Since Luo Sha temporarily did not perceive what kind of danger everyone would encounter, nor did he sense any fluctuations of chaos psychic power. So, he planned to follow the Custodes Tribune who was escorting the Primaris Astartes onto the other fleet, to see if he could successfully take all the Black Templars away. After all, the Black Templars, known as Black Orcs, were Astartes with extremely devout faith and formidable combat power, making them perfectly suitable to become Luo Sha's progeny. For the next period of time, the transport ships within the Torchbearer fleet first docked their landing platform with a strike cruiser. Luo Sha, leading 5 giant Raven Guards, and the Custodes Tribune also entered the expedition fleet's vessel for the first time. Thump, thump, thump. As soon as everyone stepped onto the metal deck, under the gaze of countless mortal servants, some numb, some curious. A Black Templar's marshal, a tall figure wearing ancient Terminator armor with black and white markings, and a gold-trimmed white robe draped over his armor, immediately stepped forward. He knelt on one knee before Luo Sha, who was in his shadow clone state, and the Custodes Tribune, expressing his loyalty. However, Luo Sha, whose psychic perception was becoming increasingly acute, vaguely noticed. This white-bearded Marshal Angvian clearly showed a fleeting moment of hesitation when facing the current Primarch clone and several giant Raven Guards whose physiques far surpassed those of Astartes. And as if sensing the Primarch's vague emotions, or perhaps wanting to leave a good impression on the Primarch, Marshal Angvian, slowly rising, spoke in a deep voice to the people before him. Although he had heard of Primarch Luo Sha's formidable reputation through various intelligence reports. However, if the Custodes standing by his side had not vouched for his identity, he truly would not have dared to confirm that the Luo Sha before him was the true Primarch and Dark Side Regent my lord. Facing Marshal Angvian's obvious doubts, Luo Sha, unable to help but take a deep breath, could only explain that this was a Primarch ability he was experimenting with, and his true body was not present. In fact, without the suppression and connection at the bloodline level, it undoubtedly made Luo Sha's communication and trust with every Astartes more fragile. And every time Luo Sha faced a similar experience, he increasingly missed the familiar scene of countless Astartes willingly kneeling to greet the Primarch in the past. Not long after, the respectful Marshal Angvian completed a brief conversation with Luo Sha and the others. He immediately stepped forward to greet the Primaris Astartes who were boarding the ship. At this moment, Luo Sha, whose gaze was sweeping back and forth across the surroundings, suddenly expressed some doubts to the Custodes Tribune standing beside him. According to the information previously held by the Torchbearer fleet, this expedition fleet still had fewer than 100 Astartes veterans alive. However, apart from Marshal Angvian and a few bodyguard members, no other Astartes were seen on the entire deck. This was unusual for an expedition fleet that was receiving a large number of Primaris Astartes and welcoming the arrival of a Primarch. Especially in the eyes of the extremely devout Black Templars. The Primarch, as the Emperor's son, was the son of God, and every arrival would inevitably be surrounded by everyone, who would insist on seeing him in person. At this moment, Luo Sha, instinctively narrowing his eyes, casually played with strands of dark shadow that danced back and forth in his large palm. Although he still did not sense any fluctuations or aura of chaos psychic power, he still spoke to remind the Custodes Tribune and the giant Raven Guard to be vigilant. The next moment, after a large number of Primaris Astartes were personally inspected by Marshal Angvian, the taciturn individuals, guided by countless mortal servants, drove their power armor towards their designated cabins. And Marshal Angvian also turned and invited Primarch my lord and the Custodes Tribune to temporarily remain inside the ship to participate in the Black Templars Expeditionary Forces welcome ceremony. Luo Sha, who was already mentally prepared for this, agreed without any hesitation. However, as everyone was heading to the upper cabins together, Luo Sha, in his shadow clone state, took the opportunity to send a secret communication to the Custodes Tribune, instructing him to stall Marshal Angvian. He then immediately used Shadow Step, silently moving throughout the entire ship. Luo Sha wanted to find out what had happened to this expedition fleet as soon as possible. Because he suspected that this time the danger of the requested support did not come from outside, but from within the Black Templars' expeditionary force itself. At this moment, Luo Sha, utilizing the characteristics of shadow power, he explored the vast ship like an invisible ghost. And it was precisely because of this that he was able to smoothly find dozens of Black Templars conducting a pre-battle sermon in the ship's armory. "Battle brothers, I have protested numerous times to Marshal Angthian, those newcomers are all unclean beings, they are not worthy to fight alongside us, we are the great masterpiece of the Holy Emperor, while the Primaris Astartes are merely the dirty creations of Belisarius Call." An Astartes veteran standing in the center growled in a deep voice to the surrounding crowd. His bolter and power sword, gleaming with cold light, made subtle clanging sounds at his power armor's waist. And the Son of Vengeance who allowed the creation of those unclean beings is also an apostate. Guilliman is already a heretic, he is still fighting for humanity now, but the craving for the Golden Throne will eventually consume him, making him completely follow in the footsteps of his Primarch brothers Horus. Therefore, we must stand up and resist, use our strength to stop this blasphemy against the great God Emperor. Battle brothers, we must make those unclean beings pay a heavy price, we must make the Son of Vengeance ultimately regret all his decisions. Wait, Fortress Master Bjornis. Didn't the legendary Dark Side Regent my lord already arrive within our fleet? Why don't we seek him to preside over justice? I believe this decisive Primarch my lord will surely listen to all our demands. At this moment, just as Fortress Master Bjornis, who had just attempted to incite rebellion, finished speaking, a Black Templars who clearly looked like a new recruit immediately spoke up. But Fortress Master Bjornis, his expression growing colder, suddenly raised his bolter from his armor's waist. The dark muzzle was already pointed at the new recruit's head. However, at this moment, a slightly gloomy and cold voice temporarily interrupted this conspiracy of fratricide. I heard, you wanted to see me. Hey, I've always believed that faith and religion are a slow-acting, fatal poison, but the human empire today is beyond saving, so I am also learning how to control the national religion, hoping to shape it into a tool of faith for my own use in the future. But I never would have thought. A group of Black Templars, whose faith has unexpectedly deviated, but are extremely devout, would actually consider Guilliman a heretic. I wonder what my Primarch brothers will say when they find out. I haven't detected any signs of chaos corruption here, which means this is a decision from the bottom of your hearts, you traitors, isn't it? How about this, I allow the traitors among you to pick up melee weapons and resist me. If anyone doesn't want to die, then stand still. In an instant, a massive body, reformed from threads of dark shadow, appeared before dozens of Black Templars. Luo Sha, with an utterly cold expression, spoke calmly to the crowd in front of him. Warped demon, how dare you impersonate the Dark Side Regent? Battle brothers, pick up your weapons, prepare for battle. However, at this moment, Lord Bionos, his expression suddenly changing, quickly turned his bolter, which was pointed at the new recruit, towards Luo Sha. At the same time, as he moved his power armor backward, he roared loudly at the people around him. Luo Sha, whose perception was incredibly sharp, quickly detected the small movements each Black Templar was making. He first let out a sigh, then shook his head. From the depths of his black eyes, formed by countless dark shadows, an extremely strong killing intent suddenly burst forth. HMPH, a bunch of things that don't know their place. With a cold snort, Luo Sha suddenly transformed his entire shadow clone into a storm of ravens large enough to envelop the armory. Each terrifying giant raven, formed by shadow power, carried a whistling sound, forcefully striking through any Black Templar who picked up a weapon. In fact, facing Primarch-level psionic power, the Black Templars, who had long since abolished their librarian units, were completely powerless to resist. In just a few seconds, the shattered remains of dozens of Black Templars scattered like a rain of blood across the metal floor and various weapon equipment. At this moment, as countless shadow ravens returned, they gradually condensed into Luo Sha's massive body. Still standing on the ground, besides that Black Templar new recruit, was only Lord Beonos, who had tried to incite rebellion. Primarch. My Lord Primarch. Lord Beonos, clearly showing fear, stiffly knelt on one knee before Luo Sha. The bolter tightly held in his hand inadvertently slipped from his fingers, falling heavily onto the blood-soaked metal floor. New recruit, as a Primarch, I need to tell you something. These rebellious Black Templars, and this traitorous fortress master with ill intentions, cannot represent the true will of the Black Templars. In my memory, the Black Templars have always been an Astartes battle group extremely devout in their faith to the Emperor. Perhaps some of their actions are foolish, but they never retreat in battle. I still remember those Black Templar battle brothers who charged into battle with me against Alpha-level psionics, and countless expedition fleets deep within Imperium Nihilus are struggling immensely to resist the attacks of various Xenos and Chaos. Therefore, I hope you can remember everything that happened today, and in the future, gradually experience the resilient will and charm of the Black Templars, becoming a true Black Templar. New recruit, I command you in the name of a Primarch to draw your melee weapon and chop off this traitor's head. Luo Sha's low voice slowly echoed through the bloody air around them. And the Black Templar new recruit, standing among the shattered corpses of countless battle brothers, after quietly listening to the Primarch's admonition, unhesitatingly drew his power sword. He suddenly propelled his power armor, heavily slashing at Lord Beonos, who was trying to get up and resist. Just tens of seconds later, this Black Templar new recruit successfully chopped off the traitor's head and personally brought it to Luo Sha. Luo Sha, nodding slightly, raised a large hand and heavily patted the new recruit's thick shoulder pad as encouragement. Next, Luo Sha, once again revealing his massive figure inside the ship, led the Black Templar new recruit, who was clutching the traitor's head, on the path to the upper compartments. When Luo Sha saw Marshal Angvian, who was frowning deeply, again, he suddenly used Shadow Step on him, kicking Marshal Angvian, who was wearing Terminator power armor, flying away. Angvian, as the marshal of this expedition fleet, you shouldn't have failed to notice that a crisis of faith had already appeared within the warband. You neither chose to kill the ringleaders on the spot, nor did you choose to try and solve the problem. Instead, you allowed this erroneous faith and ideology to spread among the Astartes. From now on, all your military ranks and honors are hereby completely stripped by me in the name of the Dark Side Regent. This newly arrived batch of Primaris Astartes, as well as the other veterans who did not participate in the rebellion, will all be taken by me. You will also join my Calamity Legion as an atoning person, bearing the consequences for all the losses you personally caused. At this moment, Luo Sha, with an unpleased expression, issued his command without any room for rebuttal. And Angvian, who had just climbed up from the metal floor, could only lower his head with a heavy expression, slowly kneeling before the Primarch. In fact, Angvian had not failed to try and resolve the faith issues within the expeditionary force in the past. But he did indeed underestimate the speed at which erroneous beliefs spread among the Astartes and the significant harm they caused. Soon after, the Primaris Astartes, who had just arrived within the expedition fleet, once again prepared for a transfer. And Luo Sha, who had tried to entice a Custodes tribune back into the Legion, ultimately chose to abandon that idea. These elite warriors, who belonged only to the Emperor, were all stubborn as stones in their thinking, and it was no wonder that even Chaos found it difficult to corrupt their will. At this point, Luo Sha's and the 5 giant Raven Guards' prayer support was temporarily over. He used the large portal opened by 5 golden throne coins to bring this Black Templar's expeditionary force fleet back into the Legion completely intact. After Luo Sha, who had returned, met with Tiberos and the others. A company belonging to the Black Templars was officially established within the Calamity Legion. Boom boom boom. Inside the flagship, outside the Primarch's palace, where the light had brightened once more. Tiberos, still clad in ancient Terminator power armor, looked down at Captain Titus beside him with his dark eyes. He also noticed that Captain Titus's tall body was wearing vibranium power armor, which was only granted to Astartes who were close to the Primarch and whose combat power far exceeded normal specifications. At this moment, Tiberos said in a low voice, "Captain Titus, I have already told you the specific situation that my Lord Primarch explained. Do not view this simulated training as a difficult combat mission. Just treat it as an unforgettable journey where you won't truly die. This is also due to my Lord Primarch's profound love. In fact, I never intended to become a captain of the Ultramarines Company. Many times, I prefer to face various difficult situations alone, and I hope my combat power can provide more assistance to my Lord Primarch." Captain Titus, whose face always remained resolute, replied humorlessly. One of his massive hands unconsciously lifted, his fingertips gently caressing the vibranium shoulder pad on his right shoulder, which was almost identical to Luo Sha's Primarch armor. Buzz buzz buzz. At this moment, the Primarch's palace gate in front of the two slowly opened. 5 immensely tall giant raven guards, still enveloped in the strong smell of gunpowder and blood from their powerful bodies, heavily stepped into the ship's corridor. "My Lord Primarch has ordered that you may enter." A leading giant raven guard slightly turned his vibranium helmet, which he never took off, and his cold gaze from behind the visor fixed on Tiberos and Titus as he said in a deep voice. Then, the 5 giant raven guards immediately drove their specialized vibranium power armor and walked deeper into the ship's corridor. These battle brothers exude a very strong aura. It's not just an issue of equipment level generational crushing. Even in unarmored combat, I might not gain much advantage. Captain Titus slowly withdrew his gaze and said with a solemn expression, "Captain Titus, if there's an opportunity, I suggest you still choose to cross the Primaris Rubicon. On one hand, the intensity of future battles will gradually increase, and our previous combat methods and philosophies may not be as effective. We must learn new knowledge to keep up with the Primarch's pace. On the other hand, the original Astartes will eventually be replaced by the Primaris Astartes, and even in the near future, we Primaris veterans will be replaced by these super Astartes like the giant Raven Guard." At this moment, Tiberos, who was activating his ancient Terminator armor, said without looking back. But Titus did not reply to this. He moved quickly, keeping up with the others' heavy footsteps. Dozens of seconds later, the two arrived directly below the massive figure seated on the metal throne. "Tiberos, Titus greets my Lord Primarch. You've arrived. This is a golden throne coin. Just throw it into the air with me later. I don't need to repeat the specific situation, do I?" Luo Sha, gradually opening his eyes, lightly waved one of his massive hands in the air. An incredibly blurry, half-formed shadow clone appeared before the two captains as if teleporting between the two tall figures. After the hazy shadow clone gave each person a throne coin, its entire body outline rapidly dissipated into the air. Clearly, Luo Sha had become more adept at precise control and deeper understanding of shadow power recently, and incidentally, he had developed more combat uses for it. For example, using the shadow power that maintains one complete shadow clone to divide into several or even dozens of temporary shadow clones. Although the destructive power significantly decreased, the flexibility and skill also greatly increased. As for minor tricks like using shadow power to conjure melee weapons or even energy armor, these were even more familiar ways of using it for Luo Sha, who was still unable to get up at the moment. "Are you ready? To be safe, I'll reiterate one more time. We might be on completely different timelines, so there's no need to panic at all. I believe the Emperor has his own arrangements for your existence." Luo Sha took a deep breath and looked down at Tiberos and Captain Titus, speaking calmly. The next second, the three of them, with perfect synchronicity, simultaneously threw the golden throne coins in their palms into the air. Ding ding ding. Open black lens bracket simulation starting, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket current identities. Luo Sha, Space Wolves, 13th Great Company Captain, Obscured Starfield. Searching, Luo Sha, Lord Cypher, Fortress Monastery, imprisoned close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket current companions. Tiberos normal Titus normal close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Please select a descending identity and companion first. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. If rejected, will descend randomly. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Identity selection rejected. Companion descent selected. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Simulation restarting. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You are already in the Warhammer universe. A random descent time and location will be chosen for you. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Time. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Location. Nostromo. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You had not yet opened your tightly closed eyes when you once again felt countless biting cold winds blowing across your skin. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Your massive body was plummeting through the pitch black night sky. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. More importantly, upon rapidly opening your eyes, you even found yourself completely naked, without even a basic piece of underwear. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You were already too lazy to complain about the Emperor's old man's twisted sense of humor. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You suddenly spread your muscular arms and legs, trying to maintain stability in your falling posture. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. When you were still several hundred meters from the giant, brightly lit hive city below, you abruptly transformed your entire massive body into wisps of pitch black shadow. Close black lens bracket. The next second, your two newly reformed bare feet heavily stomped into a puddle of foul-smelling rainwater on the ground. Open black lens bracket. You blinked your eyes and unconsciously let out a breath. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You had already sensed the silent gazes of countless mortal figures from deep within the dirty buildings. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Look what we have here. A giant so poor he can't even afford clothes. Or perhaps an Astartes. I hope your organs can bring a tidy sum to us brothers. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. At this moment, dozens of mortal gang's members, armed with ballistic and laser weapons, slowly surrounded your position. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You slightly shifted your gaze, looking at these mortals, most of whom had pale skin, black hair, and black eyes. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You vaguely had some premonition about this descent deep in your heart. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Believe me, if I were you, I would definitely not lay a hand on a giant naked man who just fell from the sky. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You stood perfectly still without any awkwardness, arms crossed over your muscular chest, and said calmly, close black lens bracket. Just tens of seconds later, you slowly swayed your massive, naked body forward, a bare foot covered in viscous blood stepping over a pile of human remains resembling rag dolls. With an incredibly gentle motion, your huge hand enveloped the head of the only young girl. Evidently, the trembling and tear-streaked girl had been completely terrified by the scene, which far exceeded her imagination, leaving her frozen in place and unable to move. Child, I ask, you answer. If you delay, you will die. If you answer incorrectly, you will still die, just like your mortal companions here, understand? You spoke kindly to this clearly underage gang member. The girl immediately nodded vigorously in your large palm, fearing she would end up like the broken corpses on the shattered ground. Good. First question. What hive city is this? Oh, I should first ask which planet this is. You asked the young girl in a deep voice. My lord, this is Quintus of Nostromo, one of the industrial hive cities used for refining adamantium ore. That's all I know. I'm still young, and I've never left the vicinity of the hive city. The young girl said to you tremblingly. It is indeed Nostromo. No wonder everyone has black hair and pale skin. I just noticed that your mortal eyes are also identical to those of the Midnight Lord's Astartes. You nodded slightly and continued to question her. Speaking of the Midnight Lords, have you heard of their name before? Does this hive city have a legion garrison? The young girl, whose emotions had gradually stabilized, organized her thoughts slightly. She said to you, My lord, I've only heard stories and legends of the Midnight Wanderer, but I've never seen a true Astartes angel. I have heard that many lucky individuals are chosen by important figures, completely escaping the suffering of the Hive City. Then, the last question, who are the important figures in your Hive City of Quintus? You gazed into the young girl's dark eyes, speaking indifferently. The gang leader of the Dead Man Gang. No. It must be the Hive Governor. I saw their private shuttles flying over the Hive City when I was little. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. As soon as the young girl finished speaking, your large hand slowly released her head. Without any hesitation, you activated your transparent man talent, swaying your massive body and turning to walk deeper into the street, leaving only the dazed young girl standing among the piles of corpses. You wanted to casually open the inventory page to extract various pre-prepared important supplies, such as spare power armor and melee weapons. You suddenly found that you couldn't open the simulator no matter what, as if this function had never existed. Emperor, oh Emperor, you let out a helpless sigh. You could only make a temporary change. Relying on the transparent man talent, you conveniently stole a large bedsheet from a mortal resident's home and wrapped it around your entire body. You no longer expected to find ready-made clothing that could match a giant's physique in this Hive City, at least not in the lower districts. You briefly observed the architectural style and degree of damage of the surrounding buildings, and guided by countless more dazzling and sickly lights, you walked towards the more luxurious and opulent Upper Hive City. You intended to seek some sponsorship from the Hive Governor of Quintus, believing that the always warm-hearted individual would surely satisfy your every request. Soon after, relying on the transparent man talent, you entered the Hive Governor's official residence castle as if entering an uninhabited realm. You passed by team after team of fully armed Imperial Guard, until your massive body stood before the Hive Governor, who was deep in slumber, embracing several graceful women. You slowly retracted your imperceptible transparent man talent. The killing aura and heartbeat emanating from within your massive body caused the sleeping governor to suddenly awaken. However, unexpectedly, you did not see any more panic on his smooth face. Who are you? Judging by your size, you must be an Astartes, right? From the Midnight Lord's Legion. If you needed my help, even just a message would have sufficed, why come directly to me? He took a few deep breaths to steady himself, then said to you with a bitter smile. Haha, Astartes. Any Astartes who haven't joined the rebellion would call me Gene Father. Even the Midnight Wanderer, Conrad Kurz, who is known on your planet, is merely one of my brothers. You looked down at him from above, speaking indifferently to the Hive Governor. Wait, are you also a legendary Gene Seed Primarch? Which Primarch of the human empire are you? The Hive Governor, eyes wide in disbelief, subconsciously asked you. You quickly noticed that one of his hands subtly moved across the smooth, pale skin of a graceful woman, reaching for a communicator hidden by a mound of flesh. You seem like a smart man. I assume the Midnight Lords have placed one or even several combat teams in this Hive City, right? Are you planning to rely on their arrival to escape your current predicament? You gazed at him with no emotional fluctuation. Governor, trust me, the help I need from you is simple. I only require a fitted power armor and a suitable melee weapon. If you accidentally call the Midnight Lords, I'm afraid it will be you who needs me to save you instead. As soon as Luo Sha finished speaking, the Hive Governor, his face gradually turning grim, gripped the communicator tightly in his palm. Completely disregarding the startled graceful women, he quickly said to Luo Sha in a deep voice. Stranger Astartes, if you turn and leave now, I can overlook your intrusion. If you dare to threaten my life, even if I unfortunately die here, you will not escape the full retaliation of the Midnight Lords. Your gaze fixed on this unexpectedly stubborn Hive Governor, and you subconsciously let out a low sigh. Alas, then I'll give you the chance to call the Midnight Lords for help. I originally wanted to use external force to save some steps and effort, but I didn't expect to still have to strip equipment from dead people. Indeed, we loyal Primarchs have to rely on ourselves for everything. Nostromo, the planet of eternal night. Beneath this perpetually dim and dark night sky, countless evils are repeatedly enacted within every hive city. Murder, robbery, gang warfare, and other heinous incidents have almost become a daily occurrence, happening every minute of every second on this planet. Perhaps when the legendary Midnight Wanderer was still here, the living environment on this planet had indeed improved quite a bit. But now, Comorig, belonging to humans, is probably the true spiritual core of Nostromo. Boom, boom, boom. The roaring engines from 2 Stormbird transport ships gradually echoed above the Hive City, attracting the longing and prying eyes of countless idle Hive City residents. The black-blue painted metal fuselage was illuminated in various colors by a large amount of ethereal and morbidly brilliant lights, as if symbolizing the future fate of the Midnight Lords. At this moment, before the 2 Stormbird transport ships, each carrying 2 combat teams inside their cabins, could descend into the Hive City. A large flock of crows, seemingly formed from dark shadow, swiftly rose from the shadow of the tallest building, launching a surprise attack on the aerial vehicles hovering in the night sky. In a flash of lightning and fire, the pilot of one of the Stormbird transport ships reacted incredibly quickly. He immediately dodged the terrifying impact of the large shadow flock with remarkably agile piloting skills in midair, and then controlled the Stormbird transport ship to instantly adjust its flight posture, rapidly flying towards the ground of the Hive City. However, the other Stormbird transport ship was not so lucky. A large number of shadow crows, capable of easily penetrating the metal of the fuselage, completely enveloped the entire transport ship. By the time the Midnight Lords inside the cabin let out tragic wails, their piercing cries even vaguely penetrating the shadow flock. The Stormbird transport ship, which had already become Luo Sha's possession, was surprisingly transported completely intact to the platform of the tallest building in the Hive City. Boom! Soon after, with a dull thud of metal hitting the ground, the Stormbird transport ship, with streams of dark red blood flowing from its cabin seams, landed heavily on the building platform. Countless shadow crows, flapping their ethereal wings, instantly left the transport ship like birds returning to their nest, instantly coalescing into Luo Sha's massive body. I told you, a few combat teams of Midnight Lords are useless. Perhaps if my Primarch brothers were to personally step in, they might be able to play with me. You looked at the pale-faced Hive Governor with cold eyes devoid of emotional fluctuation. A wisp of cold night wind slowly sweeping across your large body caused the sheet clothing to emit a faint rustling sound. I have never heard of any Primarch in the human empire similar to you. What exactly are you? The terrifying abilities you just displayed, even the legendary Midnight Wanderer couldn't do. The Hive Governor, whose complexion changed back and forth again, seemed to feel an ultimate shock that subverted common sense. Finally, he took a deep breath and made an important decision. My Lord Primarch, I surrender. However, the resources a Hive Governor like me can mobilize are too few. The power armor I can find might not meet your needs. I can, in my name, summon the 9 noble families of Nostromo for you. As the uncrowned kings of Nostromo, they will surely be able to gather a set of precious equipment far exceeding ordinary specifications for you. The Hive Governor's words slowly echoed in your ears. You looked down at the Hive Governor, who had already chosen to kneel on one knee, and instinctively let out a low murmur. When he left Nostromo back then, he should have directly massacred these noble classes completely, otherwise, the home planet might not have fallen to its current state. At this moment, your murmur was temporarily interrupted. Your incredibly keen psychic perception had already detected several tall figures moving stealthily around you. You instinctively narrowed your eyes, a cold sneer involuntarily appearing on your face. The next second, a layer of energy armor, entirely formed from dark shadow, temporarily covered your massive body. A grotesque shadow scythe instantly materialized in one of your giant hands. Thump, thump, thump. In an instant, 2 Midnight Lords, holding power claws and with a pair of bat-like wing membranes swaying on their helmets, suddenly revealed their terrifying figures from the shadow of the building. They cooperated with incredible tacit agreement, splitting into upper and lower directions, rushing towards your massive body head-on. At the same time, the other three Midnight Lords, vigorously activating their power armor and wielding power claws or power swords, also burst out from their hiding places, rapidly attacking from behind you. Bang, bang, bang. You showed no emotional fluctuation in the face of danger. One of your giant feet stomped heavily on the ground, and three shadow clones suddenly separated from your massive body, then rapidly rushed towards the Astartes of the Midnight Lords. Just a few seconds later, as the three shadow clones swung their shadow scythes back and forth, chunks of flesh mixed with shattered Dao steel armor crashed to the ground, emitting incredibly muffled and terrifying sounds. You slowly swayed your massive body, where the dark shadow was dissipating, and stepped forward. You came before a Midnight Lord who had not yet completely drawn his last breath. You bent down slightly and lifted the dismembered individual from the blood-soaked ground into your giant palm. You gazed without pity at this Midnight Lord, who could no longer speak, then directly began to gnaw on his exposed fresh flesh, intending to extract necessary intelligence information from him. However, the next second, as you were rapidly examining the other party's memories, you suddenly slammed the Midnight Lord in your palm onto the ground, completely sending this Midnight Lord back to the Sea of Souls. Haha, a bunch of criminal scum actually brazenly became Astartes. No wonder the quality of the Midnight Lord's soldiers gets worse with each generation. The expression on your face grew increasingly cold. You slowly shifted your massive body, your gaze fixed on the Hive Governor, who didn't dare to move, and said, "Go now and summon the 9 noble families of Nostromo. Tell them to get me a fitted set of equipment as quickly as possible. If the 9 noble families don't cooperate, then tell them that my Primarch brother, the Dark King of Nostromo, Midnight Wanderer Conrad Kurz, is on his way back to the home planet. And he has only one purpose for returning here, to utterly destroy this planet of eternal night." Buzz buzz buzz. With the piercing sound of metal chains pulling back and forth, pieces of adamantine power armor components, produced in Nostromo, were slowly being donned onto your massive body. This master-grade power armor, with some functions not yet fully completed, was once a precious gift that the previous governor intended to offer Conrad Kurz. However, as the Midnight Lord's legions' control over their homeworld, while participating in the Great Crusade, gradually weakened. The aristocratic class, who had once again become the uncrowned kings of Nostromo, not only assassinated the governor personally appointed by Kosh. They also replaced most of the Midnight Lord's soldiers with criminals and scoundrels of bad behavior, and a portion of the command hierarchy was replaced by the descendants of nobles. Therefore, this master-grade power armor, named Dark Monarch, had its different adamantine components collected separately by the 9 great nobles. This seemed to symbolize that the Midnight Wanderer, who had once suppressed the aristocratic class with fear for countless years, had been dismembered by them and was no longer to be feared. This is also why, when you ordered the Hive Governor to quickly relay the crucial news that Conrad Kurz was about to return to the homeworld and intended to destroy Nostromo. One of the reasons the 9 great nobles, upon hearing this, scoffed at it and simply did not believe such a thing would happen. It wasn't until you once again transformed into a true storm of crows, thoroughly slaughtering the Skrywalk family, who were leading the resistance among the 9 great nobles. Only then did these Nostromo nobles, who had no redeeming human qualities and could only be conquered by fear, successively offer you the master-grade power armor that once belonged to the Midnight Wanderer. Thump thump thump. You slowly drove your massive body, now clad in adamantine power armor, stepping down from the loading platform, as numerous mortal servants frantically fled from your vicinity. You completely ignored the scattering mortal servants and walked directly to a group of Hive City nobles kneeling on the ground. Do you think I will help you fight against the Midnight Wanderer? Fight against the coming exterminatus? Your cold gaze looked down at the terrified nobles as you calmly spoke. There are indeed some personal grievances between my lord and him that need to be resolved, but it is not for the sake of you people. In fact, if this were my lord's homeworld, there would probably not be many living beings left on Nostromo. Your low voice slowly echoed in everyone's ears. You could clearly see countless human emotions repeatedly appearing on their faces: fear, hatred, bewilderment, and even a yearning for their short lives could appear on one face simultaneously. At this moment, you immediately drove the adamantine power armor forward, and the shadow cast by your massive body enveloped the heads of many nobles. You casually picked up the hive governor from the nearby crowd of nobles and said to the slightly trembling individual, "Have your psychers send a communication signal to the Legion fleet that is about to arrive at the Nightfall planet. Tell Midnight Wanderer Conrad Kurz that one of his Primarch brothers is waiting for him on the homeworld. If he doesn't dare to come down, then by all means, unleash the Exterminatus." "Yes, my lord, Primarch," the hive governor shouted hoarsely. You watched the stumbling hive governor run deeper into the building. He clearly dared not disobey any of your commands. You walked directly towards the platform where the Stormbird transport was parked without looking back. Ever since you learned that Conrad Kurz was about to return to his homeworld, you had already prepared for all contingencies. Either he would learn of the presence of an unknown Primarch and personally lead the Midnight Lord's Legion to Nostromo to engage in a fierce battle with you, or he would directly unleash the Exterminatus, turning you and the entire Nightfall planet into countless specks of dust in the universe. However, based on your past encounters with Conrad Kurz, this battle also seemed inevitable. You even suspected that everything currently happening was being used by some unknown fate to fill in the gaps in the timeline. Even if you chose to pilot the Stormbird transport and forcibly leave the Nightfall planet, you would still have a fierce face-to-face battle with the Midnight Wanderer at some later point in time. Boom boom boom. As time continued to pass, one massive metal vessel after another gradually appeared in Nostromo's low orbit. Conrad Kurz's Gloriana-class battleship, the Nightfall, slowly emerged, surrounded by numerous other ships. At the same time, the Midnight Lord's Legion's massive fleet did not launch an Exterminatus-level orbital bombardment on the Nightfall planet. Instead, heavily armored landing pods, wreathed in fire, swiftly cut through the dim nightfall, initiating their descent towards the ground of the Hive City. At this very moment, your massive body stood atop the tallest building in the Hive City. The omnipresent shadow power surrounding you seemed to portray you as a deadly monarch hidden in the darkness. You slightly tilted your head back, your cold gaze fixed on the landing pods that resembled a meteor shower, and subconsciously took a deep breath. Inside a more distant Hive City, large numbers of Midnight Lords who had just exited their landing pods unhesitatingly pulled the triggers of the bolters in their palms, unleashing a frenzied carnage upon the countless fleeing Nostromo citizens. Conrad Kurz's will to destroy the Nightfall planet had not changed. It was merely that due to your unexpected involvement, he temporarily altered the form of the Exterminatus's execution. You suddenly drove the adamantine power armor forward, then your entire massive body rapidly plummeted towards the Hive City ground 1,000 meters below. In an instant, your massive body directly transformed into a small-scale storm of crows. Countless shadow crows swept past the low eaves and colorful lights of Hive City buildings, swiftly enveloping the teams of Midnight Lords who were engaged in carnage. You must tell Midnight Wanderer Conrad Kurz your exact current location, so that he comes to find you personally. And a more effective method than a communication channel, of course, is to build a mountain of blood and corpses from his numerous blood descendants. That would be far more conspicuous. My dear Primarch brother, Conrad Kurz, I am waiting for you in the Hive City of Nostromo. Where are you? You thought to yourself, while casually taking the fragile lives of Midnight Lords one by one. Boom boom boom, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket one after another, massive fireballs streaked across the dim night sky, hurtling towards your massive body. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. These are Omega pattern incendiary cannons, a favorite of the Midnight Lord's tactical support squads. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. This ancient weapon, possessing devastating destructive power, is something even a Primarch might not be able to withstand head-on. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. However, at this moment, you abruptly activate your adamantium power armor and leap up from the ground. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Fleeting shadow clones instantly burst forth from around your massive form. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. They passed through the narrow gaps between the numerous fireballs, using shadow scythes wielded in their palms to cleave squads of midnight lords into countless fragments of flesh and blood. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Thump thump thump. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Just as you were constantly dodging the concentrated fire of fireballs launched from the incendiary cannons, while also wantonly slaughtering many midnight lords. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Accompanied by a series of extremely dense and heavy footsteps. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. More than 50 black armored warriors clad in cataphractii pattern Terminator armor rapidly emerged from the shadows of the buildings. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Like a pack of humanoid wolves encircling their prey, they completely surrounded you. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Where is Conrad Kurz, that coward? Why would he send you, his sons, to die in his place? You couldn't help but reveal a mocking sneer from the corner of your lips. Open black lens bracket. As soon as your words fell. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. The taciturn black armored warriors answered you with a barrage of bolter fire and the violent roar of incendiary cannons. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You took a deep breath. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. As countless dark shadows writhed and danced around, an extremely thick layer of shadow armor instantly enveloped your massive body, completely blocking the bursting bolter rounds and the terrifying fireballs of the incendiary cannons outside of your adamantium power armor. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You, as a whole, unleashed shadow step like an elusive shadow specter. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Every time your massive figure flashed across the ground. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. One to several black armored warriors, unable to react in time, were brutally cleaved in half by the shadow scythes condensed in your palms. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. In just a moment, the number of casualties in this most elite black armored warrior unit of the Midnight Lord's Legion rapidly increased. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Buzz buzz buzz. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Just then, as you emerged from shadow step with your massive body, before you even had time to wield your shadow scythe to kill a black armored warrior within reach. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. A danger warning from your keen senses and bestial instincts made you subconsciously activate your adamantium power armor and take a step forward. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Rumble. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. The next second, a chain glaive with a roaring, sharp chainsword blade, carrying a tremendous force, grazed your shadow armor and slammed heavily into the ground, sending countless gravel and dust flying. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Immediately after, a midnight lord with several hideous scars remaining on his pale face rapidly entered the area, clad in Terminator power armor. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. I am Judgment, I am Retribution, I am First Captain Sevatar of the Midnight Lord's Legion, the Prince of Crows. Who or what are you? The opponent stared at you with extreme caution and growled. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. At this moment, you did not launch an even more terrifying counterattack. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Your entire vision was suddenly filled with a large number of mysterious and unknown psychic phantoms swirling around the tall form of the Prince of Crows, Sevatar. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You seemed to see with your own eyes an older or more senior Sevatar fighting alongside Captain Talos and others, with countless Primaris Midnight Lords clad in new power armor constantly following behind him. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Ha ha ha, Sevatar, is it? It seems you are destined to be my son. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. At this moment, you couldn't help but let out a low chuckle, and you said loudly to the increasingly vigilant Prince of Crows. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. I can give you a chance to choose. Immediately take your Terminator brothers and leave Nostromo. This is my duel with the Midnight Haunter. You sons need not interfere. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. However, as soon as your words fell, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Once again, you were answered by more than 20 black armored warriors and the melee weapon suddenly raised by Prince of Crows, Sevatar, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You shook your head slightly, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You suddenly dissipated the shadow armor covering your massive body, and pointed the shadow scythe condensed in your palm at the surrounding people, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Thump thump thump, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. The remaining 20 or so black armored warriors, personally led by Prince of Crows, Sevatar, launched a fierce and tragic charge towards your position, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You did not use shadow step or shadow clones to attack, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You intended to force them to retreat by relying on your overwhelming conventional combat skills, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Your shadow scythe suddenly swung, severed the power claws of more than a dozen black armored warriors in succession, and then conveniently chopped the heads off several black armored warriors from their bodies, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Your 2 heavy magnetic boots were raised one after the other, and 4 black armored warriors who wanted to launch a sneak attack from your blind spot were kicked hundreds of meters away by you, who reacted quickly, and crashed heavily into the depths of the buildings, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. At the same time, you also suddenly raised a thick arm covered with adamantium armor and firmly blocked the chain glaive that Prince of Crows, Sevatar, had chopped down from above, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Almost instantly, you grabbed the opponent's melee weapon and violently lifted the entire tall body of the Prince of Crows off the ground, then threw it out with force, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You, relying solely on Astartes level offensive techniques and combat methods, inflicted unrecoverable casualties on Prince of Crows, Sevatar, and the black armored warriors, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You immediately activated your adamantium power armor and launched an extremely terrifying combat charge towards the remaining black armored warriors, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. The defensive capabilities of those cataphractii pattern terminators could not completely nullify the terrifying power erupted by your massive body. In the end, not a single black armored warrior was able to escape your shadow scythe alive, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Dozens of seconds later, you slowly drove your adamantium power armor over the tattered corpses of many black armored warriors, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Your cold gaze looked down at Prince of Crows, Sevatar, who had not yet fully emerged from the rubble of the building, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. In a slow motion that tormented the opponent's will, you slowly placed the shadow scythe condensed in your palm on Sevatar's neck, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. It's a pity, although I saw a part of your future through psychic visions, I don't really believe in the omens that psychic power brings me. I want to see what kind of changes will happen in the future if I chop off your head now, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Your eyes growing colder, you said in a low voice to Prince of Crows, Sevatar, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Hee, I surrender, close black lens bracket. Thank you all for your support. At this moment, you were clearly surprised and puzzled by the attitude displayed by Crow Prince Sevatar. He had been loyal and ready to die just moments before, but as soon as your shadow scythe was placed at his neck, he instantly changed his tune. Boom boom boom. However, at this point, you hadn't had a chance to do anything to him. One after another, whirlwind missiles ripped through the night sky, and a metal storm of countless solid bullets suddenly swept towards your massive body. Facing such intense concentrated fire, even you had no choice but to immediately activate your adamantine power armor and leap hundreds of meters away. And Crow Prince Sevatar, lying in the building's rubble, also seized the opportunity to activate his Terminator armor, quickly disappearing into the deep shadows of the building. Thump thump thump. At this moment, hundreds of mechanical-legged arachnid sentry guns, surrounded by hundreds of Midnight Lords, quickly encircled you on the ruined street. Just as you were about to transform your massive body into a terrifying crow storm once more to completely deal with these Midnight Lords. Among the countless tall figures, a Midnight Lord's commander holding a strange longsword temporarily caught your attention. Wait, I seem to smell the stench of chaos. That longsword must be a demonic sword possessed by a demon. HMPH, another fellow who doesn't know his place. The cold killing intent on your bronze face gradually spread, and wisps of dark shadow quickly wrapped around your massive body. If you had some appreciation for Crow Prince Sevatar just now, and gave the black guards he led the respect and Astartes deserved. Then, facing this unfamiliar Astartes in your field of vision, who knows how long he had been corrupted by chaos. As a Primarch, the only thing you could give him was destructive carnage filled with rage. Two shadow scythes continuously condensed in your two enormous palms. You unhesitatingly activated your adamantine power armor, charging into the densely packed Midnight Lords with terrifying momentum. The wisps of dark shadow continuously emanating from within your body seemed to trail a massive shadow cloak behind your enormous body. Rumble. At this moment, every arachnid sentry gun and Midnight Lord launched a ranged attack at you. However, countless metal bullet storms and bolter fire were completely blocked by the shadow armor you instantly condensed, and the terrifying firepower, enough to halt an armored formation, could not harm you in the slightest. I finally found you. You damned executioner. The countless vengeful spirits of the Skywalker family curse you forever. I, Scarface Earl Jando Skywalker, as the sole survivor of the family, will surely slay you, this monster, with my sword. In an instant, the Scarface Earl, the Midnight Lord's commander holding the mysterious demonic sword, roared towards you, his voice echoing through the battlefield's night sky. He even forced his way through the obstruction of several Astartes guard, activating his power armor and launching a swift combat charge. You, who were repeatedly slaughtering the Midnight Lord's Astartes, vaguely understood his identity. He must be one of the noble descendants from Nostromo who entered the Midnight Lord's Legion. In a flash, you suddenly braked your continuously charging heavy magnetic boots. The Shadow Scythe, swinging back and forth once more, completely chopped dozens of surrounding Midnight Lords, along with their power armor, into countless broken pieces of flesh, scattered across the ground. Boom! The mysterious demonic sword held tightly in Scarface Earl's palm suddenly collided head-on with one of your shadow scythes. You could clearly sense that the mysterious demonic sword was rapidly absorbing some of your shadow power, attempting to strengthen the evil power residing within the blade. You unhesitatingly dispelled the shadow scythe in your palm, using only your enormous, five-fingered hand to grab one of Scarface Earl's thick arms. Buzz buzz buzz. You suddenly differentiated numerous swift-moving shadow clones from within your massive body. Dark shadow, condensed into power claws, heavily penetrated Scarface Earl's tall body, continuously destroying his tenacious vitality. Thud. However, at this moment, a sense of danger far exceeding anything prior continuously stimulated your beast instincts, causing your massive body to instinctively crash heavily into Scarface Earl's front. The next second, you could clearly feel cold to the touch power claw blades forcibly piercing your adamantine power armor, leaving terrifying wounds on your broad back that almost reached your spinal bones. Kosh! You couldn't help but let out a deafening roar from your mouth. Extremely illusory shadow clones suddenly blasted out from around your massive body in all directions, causing the massive figure, which had been dodging and weaving in midair, to fall heavily to the side. Almost simultaneously, your enormous hand had already gripped the not yet dead Scarface Earl, crushing his entire head in your palm with terrifying force. Your other enormous hand, which you had just swung, coincidentally caught the mysterious demonic sword that Scarface Earl had suddenly let go of. I don't recall having a Primarch brother like you. Who exactly are you, the Emperor's bastard? A familiar hoarse voice slowly sounded in your ear. At this moment, with the dull thud of magnetic boots landing heavily, a terrifying giant, whose massive body was enveloped in a foul-smelling crimson cloak, and whose black and blue Primarch-grade power armor, Nightmare Shroud, was adorned with countless shriveled fingers and withered human heads, appeared in your field of vision for the first time. And he was none other than the Gene Father of the 8th Legion Midnight Lords, one of the traitor Primarchs, Midnight Wanderer Conrad Kurz. Then today I'll make sure you get to know me, my dear Primarch brother. You subconsciously tightened your grip on the mysterious demonic sword, which had suddenly become very obedient in your palm. You revealed a slightly neurotic sneer towards Conrad Kurz nearby. The next second, countless dark shadows, bursting forth from within your massive body, completely enveloped all space within a radius of several hundred meters. Chapter 896 Dark Monarch and Midnight Wanderer, Conrad Kurz 7. You instantly performed shadow step within countless dark shadows, as if teleporting. The mysterious magic sword tightly held in your palm suddenly swung, engaging in battle with the Midnight Wanderer Conrad Kurz, who reacted with incredible speed. In a flash, the two lightning power claws, named Mercy and Forgiveness, forcefully parried the mysterious magic sword that was striking down, and a large amount of dazzling sparks and impact generated from the collision swept outwards. At this moment, the scales of power, where both sides were clenching their teeth and struggling, were gradually tilting in your favor. Midnight Wanderer Conrad was not your opponent in terms of pure physical strength alone. You were just about to drive your adamantine power armor forward, fully entering his close combat range. The Midnight Wanderer, experienced in fighting Primarchs, immediately raised a huge magnetic boots covered in thick power armor, almost instantly attacking your chest and abdomen. Your eyes were fixed on Kos's gloomy face. Your other large hand clenched into an adamantine fist, descending with immense force, striking heavily on his leg and knee, forcing his entire massive body to retreat several steps. Buzz buzz buzz. At this moment, the Midnight Wanderer Kosh, who had moved Mercy and Forgiveness back and forth, seemed to show a gloomy, cold smile on his face. He quickly changed his plan of head-on confrontation with you, instead swiftly employing stealth techniques no weaker than Korax's, allowing his entire massive body to completely submerge into the omnipresent shadows around him. But you did not experience any negative emotional changes. Your entire massive body merely adjusted its combat mentality and became active once again. Because the dark shadows covering an area of several hundred meters were essentially your extended sensory tentacles. You could even clearly perceive the Midnight Wanderer's massive body moving back and forth within countless dark shadows. You abruptly drove your adamantine power armor to perform shadow step towards the edge of the shadow several hundred meters away. As your massive body emerged from the ground, the mysterious magic sword tightly held in your large palm, accompanied by a piercing shriek, struck the space in front of you. Clink, clink, clink. In an instant, the Midnight Wanderer Kos's massive body was immediately forced out of stealth by you. He had no choice but to emerge from the depths of the shadow. Two lightning power claws, imbued with a cerulean decomposition field, suddenly lifted upwards, clashing fiercely with your mysterious magic sword again and again. PFF'd. Your massive body, clad in adamantine power armor, suddenly crouched low, and your two magnetic boots stomped on the ground, emitting a loud roar. You seemed to have vaguely grasped the habits and weaknesses in his attack movements based on your past combat experience. The mysterious magic sword tightly held in your large palm suddenly changed its swinging direction, and the cold, glinting sharp blade quickly passed through the lightning power claw that the Midnight Wanderer Kosh had just separated, forcefully embedding itself deep into his shoulder. However, at this moment, the Midnight Wanderer Kosh, with his sinister eyes, seemed completely unconcerned by the injury before him, or rather, the previous attack weakness was a deliberate trap set for you. The next moment, two lightning power claws, which suddenly sliced through the dark shadow, also successively pierced through the thick outer shell of your adamantine power armor, forcefully plunging deep into your lower abdomen. Roar. You couldn't help but let out a roar that echoed all around. Your eyes turned blood red due to the pain of the injury. One of your large magnetic boots suddenly lifted upwards, striking heavily on the Midnight Wanderer Kos's chest plate, also allowing him, as he flew backward, to take the opportunity to once again lurk and vanish into the shadow. You could now clearly feel the stinging process of the severe injury caused by the power claw gradually healing, but you could no longer perceive any movement from the Midnight Wanderer Kosh. You rotated your cold, murderous eyes back and forth, then abruptly reabsorbed the dark shadows covering a several hundred-meter radius back into your massive body. At the same time, you suddenly raised your thick arms, scattering shadow clones, formed from dark shadows, completely onto the surrounding ground, and making them rapidly launch continuous fierce attacks into the surrounding air. Boom! A shimmering shadow clone vaguely touched an invisible massive body with its shadow scythe. The Midnight Wanderer Kosh, who had just raised mercy and forgiveness to parry, was once again forcibly interrupted from his stealth state. Before he could fully react, that still dissipating shadow clone was completely replaced by your massive body through the suddenly employed shadow step, and countless surrounding shadow clones also abruptly changed their attack direction, swiftly converging on you and Kosh. The mysterious magic sword tightly held in your palm swept forcefully towards the Midnight Wanderer Kosh's waist, and in your other large hand, a shadow warhammer instantly condensed from a large amount of dark shadow, crashing down heavily onto the ground where the Midnight Wanderer was about to dodge. He. However, the Midnight Wanderer Kosh, whose sinister eyes seemed to flicker with psychic fluctuations, let out an extremely low, mocking laugh. He seemed to have already anticipated your next move. He suddenly swayed his massive body, turning back and forth in place. A crimson cloak, carrying a foul odor, rustled in the air, temporarily obscuring your line of attack. But at this moment, you, reacting even faster, suddenly quickly dissipated the shadow warhammer condensed in your large palm, then spread your 5 fingers and grabbed the Midnight Wanderer Kosh's crimson cloak. Kosh, do you know why other Primarch brothers rarely carry cloaks or capes on the battlefield? You suddenly snarled, grinning, at the Midnight Wanderer, who instinctively turned his head. You suddenly let out a piercing roar that echoed throughout the night sky. You instantly gathered all the strength in your entire body, forcefully swinging the Midnight Wanderer, who was bound to the other end of the crimson cloak, like a rag doll into the air. Boom! The Midnight Wanderer Kosh's massive body was hurled by you with full force onto the shattered ground, creating a very conspicuous human-shaped shattered crater. You didn't even wait for him to react before once again swinging his entire body into the air, then swiftly hurling him to another spot on the ground. Thank you all for your support. Just as you were having an intimate greeting between Primarch brothers with the momentarily disadvantaged Midnight Wanderer. Teams of black guards wearing Terminator power armor and Primarch attendants like Shen quickly converged from the surrounding Hive City. Seeing their Gene Father being repeatedly crushed and ravaged by you, a strange humanoid monster, they all erupted with a powerful combat ability far exceeding their past. Many Midnight Lords either immediately set up incredibly powerful ranged weapons or drew out their more proficient close combat weapons. Without any hesitation, they launched an increasingly fierce attack in your direction, vowing to rescue their suffering Gene Father. Click, click, click. At this moment, as you swung Midnight Wanderer Kosh back and forth with all your strength, the Primarch grade armor, Nightmare Cloak, on Midnight Wanderer Kosh was already covered in dense cracks. Even the pale face, whose expression always exuded gloom, was covered with marks from constant collisions, occasionally revealing gruesome wounds that were wriggling and healing. You casually let the shredded scarlet cloak scatter around on the ground and stepped forward, driving your adamantine power armor. You were just about to raise the mysterious demonic sword, which you had been holding tightly in your other hand, to give Midnight Wanderer Kosh, who had been so unlucky due to the cloak's presence, a profound and unforgettable lesson. Boom! Whirlwind missiles, one after another, suddenly streaked through the dark nightfall sky, continuously striking your massive body. The extremely powerful explosion of fire also sent your entire being tumbling hundreds of meters away into the buildings. With a very displeased expression, you propped up your massive body, covered in tiny scars, from amidst the countless building ruins. You stared intently with icy eyes at the Midnight Wanderer, who was being dug out and helped up from the depths of the crater by countless Midnight Lords. Kosh, you coward who can only survive by relying on your offspring. Do you dare to face me in another direct confrontation? You roared in a deep voice at Midnight Wanderer Kosh, whose pale face grew increasingly grim. However, Midnight Wanderer Kosh, whose injuries were gradually recovering, merely turned his head and glanced at you. His entire massive body was completely enveloped in a deep burst of teleportation light. You instantly understood that Kosh must have returned to the Queen of Glory Gloriana-class battleship, Nightfall, which was orbiting the planet. You took a deep breath, slowly driving your adamantine power armor to stand up from the ground. You slightly dodged, evading one whirlwind missile after another and countless bolters that were coming at you. You were just about to launch an even more brutal carnage against the Midnight Lords in front of you. But you suddenly discovered that the Black Guards and Primarch attendants, each wearing Terminator power armor, were also completely enveloped by the teleportation light. At the same time, hundreds of Stormbird transports, carrying a large number of Astartes, continuously ascended from the skies above other hive cities, rapidly retreating towards the fleet. Rumble. Immediately after, streaks of orbital bombardment, like pure white light beams, crashed down from outside the dark nightfall sky, once again illuminating this Evernight planet from the horizon. You slowly enveloped your massive body with countless dark shadows, ascending into the air. You saw countless Nostromo civilians who had miraculously survived the Midnight Lord's carnage, either kneeling on the ground with utterly despairing eyes, staring at the orbital bombardment gradually approaching the hive city, or numbly raising their arms to each other, embracing for the last time. Most of them already knew their fate and chose to face it calmly. Buzz, buzz, buzz. At this moment, massive cracks capable of swallowing everything began to appear on the streets of every hive city, and large numbers of collapsing buildings were completely swallowed. In your memory, normal orbital bombardment could not possibly cause such terrifying destructive power in a short period. Just as you were feeling puzzled by this, a phantom image seemed to appear before your eyes. A baby amniotic fluid pod, wrapped in heavy fire, forcefully smashing through an extremely thick layer of adamantine crust, penetrating deep into the planet's core. You suddenly realized that from the moment Conrad Kurz, as an infant, descended upon the Evernight planet Nostromo. The path to destruction for this sinful planet, which had never known light, was a destined outcome. Even your arrival could not change this outcome much. You slowly tilted your entire head back. Your icy gaze stared at the massive vessels docked in near-planet orbit, and you subconsciously let out a low, cold laugh. More dark shadows rapidly spread across your massive body. You once again transformed into your warp essence liberation state, with a raven's head and a human body. Your entire being soared into the depths of the icy void like a colossal, shadowy raven, spreading its wings. You quickly moved away from the Evernight planet Nostromo, which was about to collapse and be destroyed. You launched a terrifying, suicidal charge towards the flagship of the Midnight Lord's Legion, the Queen of Glory Gloriana-class battleship, Nightfall. Your personal grudge with Midnight Wanderer Conrad Kurz was not yet over. You constantly swayed your massive body, which was emitting a large amount of dark shadows, dodging countless oncoming laser beams, rapidly approaching the massive hull of the Nightfall. With two huge shadow claws, you forcefully tore open a section of armor plating over 100 meters thick, forcibly initiating a human boarding tactic that only powerful Primarchs could pull off. As soon as your entire being stepped inside the vessel, your massive body instantly transformed into terrifying flocks of ravens, each made of dark shadows, and began a sweeping carnage through every wide corridor. Countless Midnight Lords Astartes, who were rapidly running through the wide corridors, instantly became your sacrifices. Only a portion of the Librarian Brothers within the Midnight Lords could temporarily withstand your freely spreading storm of ravens, relying on their well-honed psychic powers. Kosh, come out and face me. In your raven-headed, human-bodied state, you used your enormous shadow claws to tear apart several Librarian units that were launching psychic counterattacks against you, your deafening roar almost echoing through half of the flagship's interior. Thank you all for your support. HMPH, Conrad Kurz is the name the Emperor gave me, but I never liked this name. Quote. Just then, a faint, eerie voice flickered back and forth in your ears. You couldn't help but let out a low, cold laugh from inside the raven's head. You immediately abandoned targeting those Night Lords Astartes who continued to arrive. You allowed countless bolter rounds and psychic fireballs to rain down like a storm on a layer of shadow armor condensed from dark shadows. You concentrated all your attention on searching for any clues of the Night Haunter. Monster, I want you to remember my name. Night Haunter. In an instant, a thunderous, low roar quickly came from behind your massive body. Your beastly instincts immediately activated, and you turned your massive body around. You immediately saw the Night Haunter, with a jump pack installed on his Primarch level power armor, Nightmare Shroud, charging towards you. You had just raised your two huge shadow claws, trying to stop the opponent's fierce attack. The Night Haunter, wrapped in whistling winds, collided fiercely with your massive body. Two lightning power claws, flashing with a deep blue disruptive energy field, plunged deeply into your chest, constantly spraying out streams of pale golden Emperor's blood from the wounds. The powerful thrusting force erupted from the jump pack also caused the Night Haunter and you to repeatedly crash through the nearby tunnel walls, rolling together towards other spaces inside the ship. PFF'd. One of your huge shadow claws firmly grasped the two lightning power claws that Night Haunter Kurz had deeply stabbed into your massive body. The other huge shadow claw quickly swept across the opponent's massive body, and after the sharp claw tips embedded themselves inside the heavy armor, they also left terrifying wounds that were deep enough to see bone. However, at this time, the Night Haunter Kurz was already acting like a madman. His pitch-black eyes suddenly widened, and he seemed to completely disregard the injuries he had sustained, forcibly manipulating the jump pack in you to continuously roll and collide inside the ship, heavily falling towards a deeper space. Rumble. Along with an earth-shattering crashing sound. Your broad back forcefully crashed through a layer of thick metal deck, and your entire massive body also heavily landed on a metal floor. Strands of dark shadows that were constantly dissipating outwards suddenly dimmed a lot, also temporarily revealing a part of your true form hidden inside the raven-headed human form. At the same time, the Night Haunter Kurz, who had crashed through the metal deck with you, also heavily landed on the ground not far away. The two lightning power claws named Mercy and Forgiveness seemed to have broken off a part of their sharp claw blades, and those broken fragments must have remained inside your massive body. Haha, monster, I actually believe now that you are one of my Primarch brothers. I see the psychic images of many Primarch brothers on you, and those familiar auras from their bloodlines are constantly lingering before my eyes. At this moment, the Night Haunter Kurz, who couldn't help but let out a cold laugh, propped himself up from the metal floor, his ice-cold gaze fixed on your direction, and said, PFF'd, to be honest, if your personality wasn't so stubborn and gloomy, and you didn't care so much about psychic precognitive abilities, we might have been able to become very good brothers. You slowly spat out a mouthful of Emperor's blood that was rapidly congealing from your raven's beak. You struggled to support your massive body, which was constantly dissipating dark shadows, and knelt on one knee on the metal floor. HMPH, it seems I never had a choice. Psychic precognitive abilities have been tormenting me since I crawled out of the amniotic sac, so I can only choose a simpler method, which is to create order through killing, to eliminate evil through killing. The Night Haunter now seemed to be facing a Primarch brother who could talk to him on an equal footing. He did not immediately launch a fierce attack in your direction, but said to you in a crazed manner. In my opinion, all hatred and resistance are because the fear we create is not enough. As long as I kill enough bad people, and the means of killing are terrifying enough, so that no one dares to raise the slightest thought of resistance, and ultimately can only obediently submit to the order of the Empire, isn't this a good thing worth remembering? Strange brother, think carefully. If the tragic death of 1,000 people can be exchanged for the effect that the death of millions of people can achieve, thereby completely subduing a world, doesn't this precisely show that I am the merciful one? Moreover, the Emperor has never stopped me. Doesn't this further illustrate that my existence and philosophy are a necessary evil? As soon as the Night Haunter finished speaking, you, who subconsciously narrowed your eyes, only thought for a moment, and then said to the other party in a deep voice. Heh, the current emperor is not an omniscient and omnipotent great being, and even if he knows what you are doing, it is simply not worth mentioning compared to the other Primarch brothers. I can't even evaluate your style of doing things, because sometimes, I might do even worse than you. But, would you regard your bloodline descendants as pigs and dogs that can be slaughtered at will? Angron would. Would you regard countless mortals as sacrifices to the warp? Magnus would. Would you bury the fate of the entire legion because of short-sightedness and stupidity? Mortarion would. Would you lead a part of the Primarch brothers to launch a massive rebellion because of the corruption and temptation of the Chaos Gods? Horus would. My dear Primarch brother, the countless torments and pains you have suffered in the past, although they cannot be said to be worthless, compared to the bleak future of the human empire, which is more important. If you can believe me, then we can face everything that follows together. I don't even need you to lead the Night Lord's Legion to join any side, as long as you racked your brains to guide the conversation between the two sides to some major events that have not yet happened, but will inevitably happen. You wanted to try to pull the muddle-headed Night Hunter Conrad Kurz out of the rebel side. However, at this time, your unfinished words were forcibly interrupted by the Night Hunter raising his hand. Strange brother, my psychic precognition has told me that I will definitely die at the hands of a Calidus assassin in the future. This is a destined thing, just like those things you just told me. They are all changes that will inevitably happen in the future. Even if you and I put in countless efforts and costs, we will not be able to change it in the slightest. The Night Hunter Kurz seemed to reveal a fleeting trace of humanity from the depths of those incomparably dark eyes, and he slowly said to you in a calm tone. You stubborn fool, then I will twist off your head today. Let you see with your own eyes what a waste of crap so-called psychic precognition is. You shook your massive body, which had returned to the raven-headed human form, and stood up, your pair of gradually blood-red, ice-cold eyes staring at the other party and said fiercely. Thank you for your support. Boom, boom, boom. You suddenly propelled your massive body forward, taking several steps. You abruptly unleashed a shadow step, almost like a blink. One of your enormous shadow claws had already ripped through the air, its sharp tip whistling fiercely as it descended heavily towards Midnight Wanderer Conrad, who had yet to rise. Buzz, buzz, buzz. However, at this moment, with the rapid appearance of massive psyker fluctuations, hundreds of librarian brothers from the Midnight Lord's Legion, piloting their power armor, revealed their towering figures from the deep shadows surrounding this space. Wielding power scepters and ritual tools, they immediately gathered countless agitated psyker powers, forming layers of incredibly heavy psyker barriers that firmly suppressed your massive body. You had no choice but to temporarily withdraw your fierce attack on the Midnight Wanderer, your massive body standing rooted to the spot, resisting the confinement and suppression from the vast amount of psyker power. In fact, this was the only special method available to librarian units during the Astartes Legion era to counter powerful psyker creatures or out-of-control psykers. The application of psyker power at this time was far less precise and complex than it would be in the future. But even so, you could still feel tendrils of dark shadow power being forcibly drawn out of your massive body by countless psyker energies. Your true form, enveloped by a multitude of dark wings, gradually revealed itself in the air. You instinctively let out a roar that echoed all around. To avoid being forcibly drained of your dark shadow power by the targeted methods of those librarian units, you had no choice but to temporarily release your warp liberation state of a raven-headed human body, and your massive body, clad in adamantine power armor, landed heavily on the metal floor. Your blood-red gaze was fixed on the Midnight Wanderer, who had already re-prepared for battle, not far away. You let out a low, heavy gasp. One of your massive hands once again drew the mysterious demonic sword belonging to Scarface Earl from the waist of your power armor, gripping it tightly in your palm. Kosh, if this is the grand gift you've prepared for me, then you truly underestimate me. So be it, let us brothers have another exhilarating duel. You roared in a cold voice towards Midnight Wanderer Conrad. Without any hesitation, you propelled your adamantine power armor, launching an astonishingly powerful combat charge across the metal floor ahead. Haha, as you wish. A pair of thick arms, wearing lightning power claws, swung outwards, and Kosh, whose massive body was charging forward, let out a sinister chuckle. Boom! The mysterious demonic sword, clutched in your palm, traced several arcs, colliding heavily with the Midnight Wanderer's pair of shattered lightning power claws, and exploding outwards with visible impact waves. One of your massive adamantine power fists suddenly cut through the air, forcefully striking the Midnight Wanderer's pale face, which was now within arm's reach. The opponent, spewing hot blood and shredded flesh from his mouth, showed no weakness. A magnetic boot, forcefully stomping on the metal floor, lifted sharply upwards, and then its fully powered tip heavily struck your chest and abdominal armor, causing your entire massive body to stagger back a few steps. At this moment, the fighting style between you and Midnight Wanderer Conrad, having fully entered a state of brutal combat, gradually reverted to humanity's most primitive, savage state. Fists and feet met, swords and claws clashed. If it weren't for the fluctuating combat distance between the two of you, even the sharp teeth in your mouths would probably become one of the deadly weapons used to attack each other. After each fierce attack launched by both sides, countless fragments of armor casing and shattered flesh, stained with hot blood, continuously fell from your massive bodies, leaving countless mottled marks on the metal floor. However, thanks to both of you possessing a Primarch-level robust physique and tenacious will, horrific injuries that would be fatal to an ordinary Astartes were merely an appetizer for you two Primarchs. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Just then, with blood-red eyes, you violently plunged the mysterious demonic sword, clutched in your palm, directly into the Midnight Wanderer's chest. The back-and-forth slashing of the sharp blade almost cut through his incredibly tough sternum and the thick armor outside, forcing countless complex Primarch organs to be exposed to the air. At the same time, the Midnight Wanderer, whose entire upper body had been ripped open and whose wound was profusely bleeding, did not retreat a single step. He immediately leaned forward. One shattered lightning power claw firmly parried the mysterious demonic sword you intended to pull back, while the other lightning power claw quickly penetrated the adamantine power armor on your massive body. Several shattered claw blades plunged deep into your body, forcefully crushing a fiercely beating strong heart. At this moment, you and the Midnight Wanderer couldn't help but spew out a large mouthful of incredibly hot blood, and both of your massive bodies instinctively staggered back a few steps. But then, the intensity of the attacks between the two of you only grew fiercer. One tragic injury after another continuously appeared on both of your massive bodies. You even noticed during a lull in the attack that, deep within Midnight Wanderer Conrad's dark eyes, strange black-blue specks of light, like stars, seemed to faintly shimmer. You suspected that due to the intensity of the battle, the Midnight Wanderer's warp essence had also begun its extremely rapid path of awakening. At this moment, you had to quickly consider the path to victory. You violently propelled your severely damaged adamantine power armor, leaping backward, temporarily disengaging from the deadly struggle with the Midnight Wanderer. You immediately unleashed the dark shadow power that had accumulated within your massive body for a period of time, and shadow clones, formed from dark shadow, rapidly swept towards the librarian brothers around the duel arena. Despicable, insidious scoundrel, the heavily wounded Kosh roared in your direction. Even though the Midnight Lords present reacted quickly and immediately dodged. And even Midnight Wanderer Conrad quickly rushed towards you, trying to alleviate the combat pressure on his sons. The sudden shadow clones still caused hundreds of librarian brothers to suffer severe casualties. The layers of psyker barriers used to restrict your dark shadow power were completely shattered, losing their effectiveness entirely. Roar! You suddenly let out a roar that echoed all around. Your heavily wounded massive body once again transformed into the terrifying state of warp essence liberation. You abruptly unleashed a massive storm of crows, completely enveloping the helpless Midnight Wanderer deep within the storm. Thank you for your support. Chapter 900. Visual Controller Organ, Conrad Kurz's Justice. In an instant, shadowy giant ravens swept back and forth over Midnight Wanderer's massive body, their sharp talons carrying away piece after piece of armor debris and flesh fragments. Even with the opponent's Primarch-level resilient physique, he could not withstand your terrifying offensive after your warp essence was released once again. Just tens of seconds later, Midnight Wanderer, whose entire body was almost covered in countless horrific wounds, heavily fell onto the metal floor, emitting a dull roar. Your massive body instantly condensed from the yet-to-dissipate Raven Storm, directly standing before Midnight Wanderer. You slightly bent down, and a giant hand grabbed the heavily wounded Midnight Wanderer Conrad and lifted him before you. Your blood-red gaze stared into his dark eyes, and you spoke in a low voice. "Brother, do you still think you will die at the hands of a Calidus assassin? If I just move my finger, you will die before me. So, your obsessive ideas about psychic prophecy are meaningless. Wake up." As soon as your voice fell, Midnight Wanderer, whose pale face was covered in fine wounds, suddenly laughed. He said to you in a low voice, "My brother, do you even know what is called destiny? I swear to you in the Emperor's name, even if I cannot resist, you will not be able to kill me this time, no matter what. Hee, perhaps the next time I meet you, I will definitely put in 100% of my effort to properly entertain you." You heard Midnight Wanderer's mockery and explanation of the current situation. You immediately recalled the death memory from your first encounter with Kosh. You took a deep breath and slowly raised the mysterious magic sword tightly held in your other hand. You had already made the crucial decision to completely kill Midnight Wanderer. A bloodthirsty sneer unconsciously appeared at the corner of your mouth, and the sharp tip of the mysterious magic sword was slowly plunged by you into Conrad Kurz's massive body. Your blood-red gaze was meeting Midnight Wanderer's cold gaze, as if both sides wanted to deeply engrave each other's appearance in the depths of their minds. You could clearly feel that the sharp blade, as it moved, was only an extremely short distance from his two hearts. As long as you pushed a little harder, even a Primarch would die on the spot. Rumble. However, at this moment, the sudden violent tremor and terrifying roar inside the ship made you subconsciously shift your gaze. Just as you were slightly distracted, a gauntlet landing craft, constantly releasing melta beams to melt the metal bulkhead, quickly penetrated the thick deck above. The heavy and massive metal hull, almost carrying a large amount of metal debris and molten liquid, heavily crashed into your massive body. And Midnight Wanderer, who was held in your palm, just one step away from death, took the opportunity to break free from your restraint and fatal threat. Your entire body was dragged for a distance on the metal floor by the incredibly immense impact force, and then was forcibly slammed into the deforming and twisting metal bulkhead. You were forcibly knocked out of your warp essence liberation form by the landing craft. You clearly felt a large amount of pale gold blood gushing out from inside your massive body. A large amount of metal debris and the still active melta beams not only penetrated your adamantine power armor but also forcibly damaged your two hearts and other vital organs. You seemed to see Midnight Wanderer Conrad Kurz, who had just lightly landed from midair, looking in your direction and showing a twisted smile full of sadness. Even he himself had not expected that so-called fate, in order to make him embark on his predetermined path, would solve the problem you caused in this way. Your breathing rhythm slowed down. In your gradually blurring dark vision, you vaguely saw a large number of Astartes rushing out from inside the landing craft. You seemed to hear the familiar roars of Titus and Tiberos among them. You seemed to have accidentally died at the hands of your own people. Your blurred consciousness was detaching from your massive body. You slowly exhaled your last breath and helplessly lowered your head. You died. This simulation ended, time unknown. The retainable options for this simulation are as follows. 1. Adamantine Power Armor, Dark King, Primarch. Note: this was a gift carefully prepared by the Governor of Nostromo, the Star of Evernight, for Midnight Wanderer Conrad Kurz, but before this gift could be delivered, the Governor died in an assassination plot personally planned by the 9 noble families. Note: this power armor is significantly stronger than ordinary Primarch-level power armor just from a defensive standpoint, which may be due to the great enhancement brought by the special adamantine produced in Nostromo, and due to the destruction of the Star of Evernight, Nostromo adamantine has now become a precious mineral of legend. Perhaps some ancient weapons and equipment of similar material can still be found in the various warbands of the Midnight Lords. Note: aside from its basic functions, the power armor's other functions have not been fully developed. If a Magos of the Adeptus Mechanicus skilled in forging and modification could be found, perhaps the complete Primarch level power armor could shine with a different brilliance. Note: Hehe, 9 ways, I have 9 ways to kill you, Conrad Kurz, in a state of madness, whispered. 2. Damaged lightning power claw, mercy and forgiveness Primarch. Note: this is a pair of master-crafted lightning power claws that Primarch Conrad Kurz used for many years, damaged during an intense clash with his Primarch brother Luo Sha. Note: the origin and history of these weapons are very mysterious, which Midnight Wanderer has never revealed, but judging from the power claw's clashes with other Primarchs' weapons, its own material is not weak, perhaps forged from the essence of special adamantine produced in Nostromo, the Star of Evernight. Note: in fact, even the current name of these lightning power claws is merely what the Midnight Lord's Legion's sons call them. How the Primarch himself views them remains unknown. To some extent, for a personal weapon to be named Mercy and Forgiveness is a great irony to Midnight Wanderer himself, as the innocent civilians who died at his hands are simply countless. Note: but I never thought that there was another Primarch brother who would care so much about my fate. Father, I owe 22 a life, and I will find a way to repay him. Conrad Kurz, who was crying aggrievedly at an emperor statue made of flesh and blood, slowly raised his pale face, whose expression was gradually becoming resolute, and continued. 3. Visual Controller Organ, Conrad Kurz's Justice Primarch. Note: this is a Primarch organ personally removed by Midnight Wanderer from his skull before he was assassinated by the Calidus assassin. He unexpectedly glimpsed a future scene through a forced psychic precognitive ability, and decided to leave a gift of atonement for the Emperor and you, his Primarch brother. Note: it seems to have been enhanced and blessed by the Emperor. Note: its existence will gradually grant you Midnight Wanderer's own powerful prophetic ability of psychic precognition, but because this is a Primarch's own organ tissue, the effect of the psychic prophecy is too astonishing, making it very difficult for you to fully control, and even very easy to embark on Conrad Kurz's original self-destructive path. Fortunately, under the dual blessings of the Emperor and Midnight Wanderer, you can choose to activate or deactivate the psychic precognition ability, but each activation and deactivation interval requires a long recovery time. Note: brother, perhaps in your impression, death is a terrifying thing, but in my view, the pain of death and the torment of seeking justice are not worth mentioning, so, never compromise, because justice never compromises. A solitary and slender blurred figure stood in front of the golden throne, slowly speaking with his back to you. Note: I vaguely heard the giant wolf roaring, the lion roaring, child, go find him, he should also awaken from his slumber, the current Imperium needs his arrival. A cold sun whispered to you in a dream. Thank you all for your support. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.